The skyscraper's glass facade glittered over downtown Houston like a promise made in sunlight. Inside, the company that occupied the uppermost floors projected the same dazzling confidence. Traders in starched shirts shouted into headsets, analysts pored over spreadsheets that glowed with improbable growth, and visitors found themselves ushered through halls where abstract art met Texas swagger. At the apex of this hive stood Chief Financial Officer Martin Kessler, a man whose cobalt blue ties rivaled the sky beyond his office window. No one in the building, not even the board, suspected that Martin's genius lay not in numbers alone, but in the precise art of hiding them. He began innocently enough. When natural gas prices dipped one spring, Martin created a special-purpose vehicle, a shell company technically independent, but tethered to the firm by invisible threads of debt. The maneuver shifted short-term losses off the books, inflating quarterly profits by just a few $1,000,000. Colleagues called it creative, auditors called it complex, and investors never thought to ask. The stock climbed. Martin's maneuver became a legend whispered approvingly in conference rooms. That single sleight of hand was like the first stone slid from an ancient foundation. Nothing collapsed, so he slid another and another, until narrow tunnels ran beneath the gleaming tower. The CEO, Robert Greaves, adored numbers that moved up and to the right. He adored Martin even more for producing them. Robert's faith was paternal and blind, rooted in the belief that brilliance excuses opacity. Martin's got it handled, he'd say, waving away any director uneasy about the firm's soaring leverage. In return, Martin protected Robert's dream of transforming an energy trader into a Wall Street juggernaut. If outsiders marveled at their debt-to-equity ratio, Martin invited them to study a chart whose lines resembled a mountain staircase ascending to heaven. The explanation was always the same: we've redefined risk. Employees bought in. Secretaries invested their retirement accounts in company stock. Young managers took out mortgages on the assumption that the share price would rise forever. Even rival firms conceded the company possessed an almost mystical mastery of volatility. Newspapers ran profiles of Martin describing him as a wizard with derivatives, though no article explained exactly how his structures worked. The details were too dense, the returns too dazzling. Journalists didn't push because markets didn't punish. The tower became a shrine to perpetual motion, each quarter's profit fueled by the next quarter's expectation. Yet inside Martin's spreadsheets, reality wept for attention. The special-purpose vehicles had multiplied like cells. Some sat in the Cayman Islands, others in Delaware, each holding debt disguised as revenue, losses labeled as regulatory offsets, and liabilities offset by assets whose value fizzed away the moment you touched them. Occasionally a junior accountant noticed an imbalance and emailed a question. Martin's responses were generous with polysyllables: synthetic securitization, mark-to-model, and barren of clarity. The accountant learned to stop asking. When the energy market convulsed after a string of pipeline mishaps, the firm's trading desk suffered a $100 million hit overnight. Martin slid the loss into a vehicle called Sierra 8, financed it with a promise of future profits, and watched the share price rebound within days. But the patch frayed quickly. Sierra 8 needed real cash to service its debt, and that cash no longer existed. The next quarter, a second loss followed, then a third. Each hold demanded a larger patch until the patches themselves outweighed the original fabric. Outside analysts sensed static on the line. One hedge fund manager, Elaine Porter, dissected the company's footnotes late into the night, highlighting the phrases related party transaction and unconsolidated entity. Elaine's fund took a small short position, then a larger one. She spoke quietly on television. Something about their disclosures feels opaque. The interviewer smiled indulgently. The stock was still up 800% over 5 years, and viewers preferred faith to skepticism. But Martin felt the tremor. In staff meetings, his calm grew brittle. He raised his voice at a risk officer who questioned a numbers table, then apologized so quickly it made the apology seem rehearsed. The breaking point arrived with an autumn earnings call. For the first time, cash flow turned negative in spite of reported profits. An analyst pressed Robert on the discrepancy. Robert deferred to Martin, who spoke for 15 straight minutes, layering jargon like bricks. On the other end of the conference line, investors heard the faintest quiver in his voice, an almost imperceptible hesitation before the word liquidity. The stock slid 7% by market close. Within days, Elaine Porter's warnings appeared on the front page of the business section. Framed as a mystery, is Houston's brightest star burning out? Auditors descended with fresh skepticism. They asked for the master list of special-purpose vehicles. Martin supplied one, neatly typed, but incomplete by nearly half, and in turn hinted at others. The auditors followed the trail to locked cabinets where paper contracts lay hidden like forbidden scrolls. Emails surfaced in which Martin coached subordinates to retain flexibility in classifying debt. The drama moved swiftly after that. Rating agencies downgraded the firm's bonds. Credit lines froze. Employees who had tethered their futures to the share price watched, numb, as it dropped 40% in a single week. On a bleak November morning, Robert Greaves convened an emergency board meeting in the tower's glass-walled conference room. Martin arrived early, stared out at the bruised sky, and calculated the distance between his reputation and ruin. He could confess, perhaps salvage a shred of dignity, but confession meant prison, investors bankrupted, retirees destitute. Silence, on the other hand, had run out of hiding places. When the board demanded answers, Martin's composure finally fractured. Words tangled, figures contradicted. One director quietly dialed outside counsel. The collapse unfolded faster than the ascent. By December, the firm filed for bankruptcy, erasing tens of billions in market value and sending shockwaves through global markets. Federal agents walked Martin out of the tower in handcuffs, his cobalt tie hanging loose like an undone promise. Former employees gathered on sidewalks, some shouting, some weeping, all staring up at the darkened windows that once mirrored their dreams. In the years that followed, textbooks would analyze the accounting gymnastics, regulators would tighten rules, and Hollywood would script a blockbuster. But the heart of the catastrophe was painfully simple. A brilliant man convinced himself that deception, well packaged, becomes truth. Trust, he learned too late, is a tower built not of glass or numbers but of time and honesty. Remove enough stones, and even the brightest facade collapses into dust. The offices of Harcourt and Pell sat on the 9th floor of a gray limestone building just off Threadneedle Street, where the air carried the faint tang of espresso and ambition. Each morning the trading floor stirred like an orchestra tuning its instruments. Keyboards clicked, market feeds chirped, and the glow of 20 monitors reflected in restless eyes. At the center of this choreography stood Daniel Barrington, a portfolio manager whose tailored suits and understated gold cufflinks hinted at old money pedigree. Colleagues called him the Whisper because his voice never rose above a conspiratorial murmur, yet his trades boomed loud enough to make the Financial Times take notes. Daniel's edge appeared almost supernatural. He bought shares of telecom firm Hadrian Wireless 2 days before it announced a lucrative 5G contract, unloaded them hours before a surprise antitrust probe, and repeated the pattern across half a dozen sectors. Junior analysts marveled at his timing. Rivals blamed luck. Daniel deflected credit with a modest shrug, muttering something about deep research. In truth, his deepest research involved a mahogany-paneled wine bar near St. Paul's, where he met a man named Oliver Trent. Oliver worked in the corporate advisory wing of the Ministry for Digital Infrastructure. His role granted early access to market-moving policy decisions, spectrum auctions, antitrust investigations, merger approvals. He was paid respectably but not richly, and his marriage to a sculptor living in Camden teetered under London's exorbitant cost of living. When Daniel first approached him, the lure was gentle. I can translate your information into returns. We both win. We stay quiet. Oliver hesitated, nursing a glass of Rioja while the bar's jazz trio drifted through a rendition of Autumn Leaves. In that soft blue light, the notion of whispered trades felt almost romantic, an affair with risk rather than flesh. The arrangement flourished. Every fortnight Oliver slid policy drafts across the table like secret love letters. Regulatory delays, upcoming 5G spectrum releases, rumored cybersecurity directives. Daniel funneled the intelligence into precisely timed positions. Call options here, short sales there. each transaction executed through an offshore entity called Arcadian Investments to sever any visible link to Harcourt and Pell. Compliance officers, lulled by Daniel's gentlemanly reputation, rarely probed. The fund's quarterly letters credited nimble sector rotation for a 28% annualized return, drawing fresh capital from pension funds in Scotland, family offices in Geneva, and a university endowment in Massachusetts. Yet every secret breeds entropy. One November morning, Sophie Williams, a junior compliance analyst with a fondness for forensic spreadsheets, noticed an odd pattern. Arcadian Investments trades mirrored Daniel's positions within minutes, sometimes seconds. Arcadian, registered in the Cayman Islands, appeared in no client list and declared no beneficial owner. Sophie drafted an internal memo questioning the relationship, but her manager advised caution. "Barrington is untouchable," he whispered, sliding the memo back across her desk. "Look elsewhere if you want a long career." Still, Sophie saved her findings on a password-protected drive, a small insurance policy against collective denial. Meanwhile, Oliver's appetite grew. The sculptor wife had left, taking half his savings and all of his confidence. To compensate, he demanded a larger cut, 10% of Daniel's gains, wired to a Hong Kong account under the name of a shell company called Chrysalis Arts. Daniel obliged. The trades were too profitable to jeopardize. But a fissure had opened. Oliver now needed proof of the money, monthly, and Daniel needed greater secrecy. They shifted meetings from the wine bar to a nondescript hotel lounge near Waterloo, where the bartender never asked names. The trigger came unglamorously, through bad timing rather than bold crime. The ministry prepared to announce a surprise ban on a Chinese telecom supplier, a decision certain to crater the share price of European affiliates. Oliver handed Daniel the document on a USB stick. Daniel shorted 3 target companies, securing positions worth £110 million. Hours before the public press release, a competing fund executed the exact same shorts, slightly earlier with even larger volume. The duplication raised eyebrows at the London Stock Exchange's market surveillance unit, which fed alerts into an algorithm trained to detect correlated trades tied to regulatory events. Arcadian Investments and the rival fund lit up the dashboard like twin flares in a moonless sky. Investigators subpoenaed trade records, and Arcadian's ownership veil proved thinner than Daniel believed. A board clerk in the Cayman registry, proud of her new digitization system, produced incorporation documents in under an hour, revealing Barrington Capital Holdings as ultimate beneficiary. Sophie's forgotten memo resurfaced when the Financial Conduct Authority raided Harcourt and Pell. Her quiet diligence became a map through the labyrinth. Daniel was summoned to a walnut-paneled conference room where FCA officers in modest suits waited with tape recorders. His legendary composure faltered only once, when they showed him a photograph of Oliver leaving the Waterloo Lounge with a brown envelope. "We will speak to Mr. Trent next," the lead officer said gently, "but we'd rather start with your narrative." Daniel's cufflinks, tiny lions rampant, seemed suddenly heavy on his wrists. Oliver was arrested at Heathrow the following dawn, ticket to Singapore in hand. In custody, deprived of the wine bar's dim lights and Daniel's soothing confidence, he recited a chronology that matched Sophie's memo almost line for line. The case dominated headlines: City Insider Ring Exposed, From Whisper to Shout, How a Jazz Bar Fueled a £200 million Trade. Clients fled Harcourt and Pell within weeks, forcing an emergency liquidation that wiped out years of gains and several pension funds' future obligations. Partners who had praised Daniel's instincts queued outside lawyers' offices, hoping to distance themselves before bonus clawback clauses triggered. Daniel pleaded guilty to insider trading and conspiracy, receiving a 7-year sentence at Belmarsh, where cufflinks are metal detected away and whispers echo in concrete corridors. Oliver, granted a lighter term for cooperation, found his sculptor ex-wife waiting outside the courtroom, not with forgiveness, but to serve divorce papers formalizing a fracture that greed had widened. In the aftermath, regulators tightened protocols around policy leaks, installing biometric locks on draft rooms and rotating advisory staff like pieces on a chessboard. Still, in the city's coffee queues, traders spoke Daniel's name with a curious reverence. His story was cautionary but compelling, proof that markets move not only on data but on desire for advantage, for validation, for the thrilling hush of a secret shared over Rioja. And so the London whisper lingers, a reminder that in the world's financial capitals, silence can be louder than any shout. Icicles clung to the eaves of the red brick Riverfront Trust building, and the Mississippi below moved as slowly as thickened glass. To commuters crossing the Wabasha Street Bridge each morning, the small wealth management firm looked cozy, almost quaint, a hearth in a city of mirrored towers. Inside, its founder, Eleanor Ellie Whitcomb, cultivated the same warmth. Wool sweaters instead of power suits, fresh scones on the reception desk, a smile so constant it felt stitched in place. Clients, many of them retired teachers and Lutheran pastors, called her our money angel. No one guessed the snowball she had started rolling 15 winters earlier. Ellie's career began humbly, bookkeeping for a parish school, then CPA night classes, then a junior post at a downtown brokerage she found too cutthroat. In 2005 she opened Riverfront Trust with a simple pitch: steady 6% returns through municipal bond ladders and low-fee annuities. She targeted neighbors who disliked Wall Street jargon. She translated balance sheets into bake sale arithmetic. Word of mouth spread through church basements and Rotary lunches until Riverfront's assets under management topped $200 million, modest by Manhattan standards but enormous in St. Paul's close-knit circles. The first crack appeared after the 2008 financial crisis. Clients panicked, withdrawing funds faster than the sleepy bond market could replenish yields. Ellie, terrified of admitting a bad quarter, dipped into new deposits to meet old promises. Just this once, she told herself, recording the transfer as short-term liquidity coverage. But clients still expected their tidy monthly checks, and fresh cash kept arriving because Ellie's reassurance sounded like scripture. By Christmas, the temporary patch had hardened into habit. The snowball rolled. Ellie hired 2 assistants, then a marketing director whose glossy brochures boasted an unbroken streak of positive returns, true only on paper. She hosted candlelit investor dinners at the St. Paul Hotel, quoting Marcus Aurelius on prudence while refilling wine glasses. Each new investor calmed the gnawing fear of exposure. Each monthly payment to earlier clients deepened the hole. She convinced herself she was buying time, that markets would rebound enough to heal the deficit and let everyone exit whole. Instead, zero interest rates flattened bond yields further, forcing riskier bets. Argentine sovereign notes, private real estate loans along Florida's sinkhole coast. Losses compounded. Bookkeeping grew baroque, with entire folders labeled Deferred Reconciliation, Do Not Consolidate. Across town, Marvin Klein, a recently retired math teacher, volunteered evenings with a Citizens Fraud Watch group. Marvin had invested his pension with Ellie and loved her cinnamon scones, yet curiosity tugged at him. Riverfront statements showed returns suspiciously smooth compared with the jagged line of his 403b. He fed numbers into his old graphing calculator, frowning when every model suggested volatility Ellie's reports lacked. He emailed her a polite query. Ellie replied with a 3-page explanation of laddered premium collars that dazzled without enlightening. Marvin filed the exchange away, uneasy. Meanwhile, Ellie's lie demanded growth. She partnered with a local megachurch, offering congregation-only funds promising faith-aligned income. Pledges poured in, swelling Riverfront past $350 million. To sustain payouts, Ellie created fictitious bond positions, assigning them CUSIP codes 1 digit off real securities, a cosmetic tweak buried in 8-point font. Auditors, hired only for annual compilations, relied on statements Riverfront itself generated. Snow muffled sound outside, numbers muffled truth within. The unraveling began not with regulators but with Minnesota's endless winter. A blizzard canceled Riverfront's February client brunch, postponing check distributions by a week. Marvin, disciplined as ever, noted the gap and contacted 2 fellow retirees. They compared deposit dates and found subtle delays recurring for months, each slightly longer. Marvin drafted a letter to the State Commerce Department, attaching spreadsheets annotated in red ink. Investigators opened a quiet inquiry, issuing subpoenas while riverfront still smelled of fresh scones. Ellie sensed a chill deeper than February. One afternoon, she returned from lunch to find agents photographing file cabinets. They requested original trade confirmations. She produced PDFs. They asked for custodial bank statements. She claimed the passwords were misplaced. In her office, a framed print of Lake Superior seemed to tilt as if the horizon itself questioned her balance. That night she sat alone by the Mississippi, watching ice floes drift like silent jurors, and rehearsed explanations that sounded brittle even to her own ears. The Commerce Department's forensic accountant, Sofia Delgado, traced cash flows and found the classic Ponzi heartbeat. Outflows to early investors perfectly matched inflows from new ones with no independent revenue. When Sofia confronted Ellie in a sworn interview, Ellie's composure depended on a single sentence. "I always intended to make everyone whole." The words hovered hollow as a snow-capped shell. Within days, state authorities froze Riverfront's accounts. Federal charges followed: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering. News spread through St. Paul like frost racing across a window pane. Parishioners learned their tithes were gone. Retirees canceled spring vacations. The megachurch's building fund collapsed. Reporters camped outside court hearings, filming Ellie in handcuffs, her cardigan buttoned wrong in nervous haste. Some victims refused to condemn her, insisting she must have been misled herself. Others, betrayed, tore up her Christmas cards. Marvin testified, voice trembling but firm, describing how trust can be an equation balanced until one silent variable destroys the proof. Ellie accepted a plea deal: 14 years in federal prison and a restitution order impossible to satisfy. Riverfront's assets covered barely 30 cents on the dollar. An appointed receiver auctioned office furniture. Desks, computers, even the scone recipe typed on floral stationery to scrape together pennies. The red brick building now houses a law firm specializing in elder abuse cases, its windows facing the same river that witnessed Ellie's long deception. Each winter, ice still drifts past Wabasha Street, indifferent to human arithmetic. In letters from prison, Ellie writes that she dreams of opening a bakery when she is released at 67. Marvin, ever the teacher, keeps those letters filed beside court documents, a private curriculum on the dangers of quiet charisma. And in church basements across Minnesota, his fraud watch seminars end with a single slide: "Trust warms the world, but even snowballs grow dangerous when rolled too far downhill." Silence reigned each evening in the marble lobby of Helixera Therapeutics, broken only by the low hum of biometric doors sliding shut. The mid-sized Swiss biotech had built its headquarters on the lakefront to project serenity: glass walls, white corridors, orchids perched like punctuation marks. Yet beneath the clean architecture rippled a fierce competition to patent the first non-opioid chronic pain drug, a molecule known in coded memos as HX29. Whoever claimed it would inherit billions. Maxime Fournier, head of data security, felt the pressure in subtle ways: an uptick in phishing attempts, drones hovering beyond permissible airspace, strangers requesting laboratory tours in shaky French. Maxime's childhood love of cryptography had earned him a doctoral thesis on quantum-safe encryption, but Helixer's executives valued him for simpler qualities: vigilance, discretion, a capacity to sit through meetings without revealing how often he distrusted everyone in them. Among the scientists, none shone brighter than Dr. Annika Weiss, a German pharmacologist who kept her hair short and her sentences shorter. She ran the HX29 project with metronomic precision, authorizing access through a tiered server called the Glass Box, a supposedly impregnable vault of genomic data connected only by one fiber line to Maxime's monitoring suite. Annika and Maxime respected each other without warmth, like neighboring chess grandmasters aware every move would be studied for advantage. The disturbance began on a rainy Thursday when Maxime's anomaly dashboard logged a 417 millisecond lag in the Glassbox's handshake protocol. A hiccup that brief could have been benign, but the timestamp matched the exact moment Anika's keycard opened her lab. Maxime phoned her. "All readings stable," she answered, annoyance tinting the words. He let it drop but initiated deeper packet inspection, feeding mirrored traffic into an offline analyzer named Russo. Rousseau confirmed a curiosity: 4 kilobytes of outbound data disguised as printer packets, too small to be the drug's full formula, but perhaps a foothold. That night Maxime walked along the quay, rain flicking off his trench coat, rehearsing possibilities. Corporate espionage was common in Zurich's financial district, less so in buttoned-up Geneva. Yet Helixer's valuation had drawn suitors from Boston, Shanghai, and Abu Dhabi, each desperate for a piece of HX-29. If data were leaking, it would not leave in obvious torrents. It would seep, packet by packet, until the vault sat empty and no alarms had ever sounded. The next morning a second anomaly appeared, insignificant alone but identical in signature. Maxime confronted Anika in her lab, shelves gleaming with beakers of pale blue solution. "The network shows micro-exfiltration from your terminal," he said quietly. She stiffened, replying that her team printed histology images overnight. Any flagged packets were likely harmless. Her tone implied the subject was closed. Maxime noticed a faint tremor in her right hand as she adjusted her safety goggles. It might have been anger or fear or simply too much coffee. He left without further challenge, but the tremor clung to his memory. That weekend he traced internal phone logs and uncovered late-night calls from Anika's office to a prepaid number registered in Liechtenstein, a jurisdiction fond of secrecy. Maxime submitted a confidential report to CEO Katerina Dufour, urging permission to surveil Anika's workstation. Katerina, ever cautious of scandal, refused outright. "If we accuse our lead scientist without proof, we implode from within," she warned. Maxime understood the politics. Investors worshipped Anika's brilliance. Still, he could not ignore the evidence. So he sought a quieter route, observing without accusing. On Monday he upgraded the building's HVAC sensors, officially to monitor energy usage, unofficially to triangulate Bluetooth beacons. The data placed Anika in the server room twice after midnight, her presence masked by a generic maintenance badge. Each visit coincided with another 4 kilobyte leak. Maxime's pulse quickened. The pattern was now mathematically undeniable. He confronted Katerina again, this time armed with graphs and timestamped video stills. The CEO exhaled, defeated, and granted him one night to obtain irrefutable proof. If he failed, the matter would be buried. Geneva's dawn came late in winter. Maxime had until then. He chose simplicity. A honey file named HX-29 protocol RevF seeded with false reaction steps that would catastrophically destabilize any lab that attempted replication. He planted it in the glass box, flagged with innocuous metadata. Then he waited, Rousseau humming like a watchful animal. At 2:11, Anika's badge accessed the server. At 2:12, 12 kilobytes, larger than before, drained toward an IP trace to a hotel 2 kilometers away. Maxime triggered an alert to building security, then sprinted down marble stairs as lights flickered to night mode. They intercepted Anika in the loading dock, lab coat half buttoned over street clothes, a thumb drive clenched in her shaking hand. Her eyes flashed something between defiance and relief. Maxime felt no triumph, only fatigue. When the guards escorted her to a glass conference room, she spoke first. "I gave them crumbs. Enough to string them along, not enough to finish the drug." Her voice cracked. "My brother's startup is bankrupt. They threatened to litigate him into ruin unless I cooperated." She paused, breathing hard. "I thought I could feed them trivia until we filed the patent, then no harm done." Maxime listened, the ethical terrain shifting beneath him. She was saboteur and savior both, betrayer of code and protector of the crown jewel. Yet intent mattered less than consequence. Trust had fissured. By dawn, police arrived with warrants. News of the arrest leaked within hours, shaving 15% off Helixer stock despite the company's statement that HX-29 remained secure. Investors rarely differentiate between near-miss and calamity. Internal fallout proved harsher. Anika entered a plea arrangement for industrial espionage. Her brother's company folded anyway. Helixera tightened access controls until hallway chatter resembled whispers in a monastery. Maxime, hailed as guardian, felt oddly hollow. Each new security layer he installed reminded him how fragile innovation is when tethered to human need, debt, pride, family, fear. motives that no firewall can neutralize. Months later, HX-29 passed clinical trials and catapulted the firm's valuation. At the celebratory banquet, Katerina toasted, "The fortress that shields our science." Applause echoed off chandeliers, yet Maxime pictured the tiny, nearly invisible packets sliding through the network like stowaway snowflakes. He understood that every fortress is merely a pause between sieges, every cipher a temporary stay against desire. Looking out at the calm black water beyond the ballroom, he wondered which breach would come next, and whether vigilance alone could ever silence the human hunger for shortcuts. Under the bright palms of University Avenue, Perimeter Diagnostics gleamed like the future. Its lobby featured a waterfall that trickled over frosted glass, and receptionists in charcoal gray jackets offered kombucha instead of coffee. The startup promised to revolutionize medicine with a single drop of blood run through a machine called the Helios Prism, a toaster-sized box that, according to marketing decks, could screen for 200 conditions in 10 minutes. Journalists compared it to an iPhone for health. Investors whispered of trillion-dollar horizons. Presiding over the vision was CEO Sloan Merritt, 32, with impeccably pressed shirts and a voice tuned to TED Talk cadence. Sloan's origin myth was irresistible. She had dropped out of MIT after a childhood friend died waiting for lab results, then labored in a rented garage until the Prism's first prototype whirred to life. The tale skipped one detail: the prototype never truly worked. Internally, engineers joked that the Prism had two modes, demo and disaster, but their laughter carried a tremor of dread. Early in the company's ascent, Chief Scientist Dr. Rajiv Patel delivered an unvarnished memo. The optical sensor misread hemoglobin interference, producing false positives for certain cancers. Sloan called an emergency meeting in a glass-walled huddle room. "Fix the optics, not the narrative," she said, fingers steepled. "Capital dries up if we blink." Rajiv argued for pausing clinical pilots. Sloan countered with a more immediate risk: Series C funding scheduled in 6 weeks. The memo disappeared into a confidential folder labeled Moonshot. Rajiv, newly granted stock options, convinced himself a solution lay just beyond the next firmware patch. Money arrived in torrents: $200 million from a Boston mutual fund, $80 million from a Danish pension plan, and, most significant, an exclusive contract with a national pharmacy chain to install Prisms in 900 storefront clinics. Sloan toured the construction sites, hard hat over designer heels, repeating the mantra, "Diagnostics at the speed of life." Technicians performed beta tests only after hours, swapping faulty cartridges until the device blinked the right result for VIP visitors. What the board saw was proof, what the lab recorded was theater. The first public fissure came from Eleanor Lin, a newly hired quality assurance analyst fresh from the FDA. Reviewing validation reports, she noticed identical noise patterns across supposedly independent test runs, a statistical impossibility pointing to recycled data. When she raised the issue with compliance, the general counsel advised tact. "Our IP is borderline classified," he warned. "Do not email concerns." Eleanor, shy but meticulous, documented her findings in a handwritten notebook instead, each page dated and initialed. Meanwhile, Sloan prepared for the grand launch, a live demo stream from a downtown San Francisco flagship pharmacy. Cameras would capture a volunteer's finger prick, the Prism's soft hum, and a triumphant printout of results. In rehearsals, error codes flared red, sending engineers scrambling for duct tape fixes. 2 nights before the broadcast, Rajiv confronted Sloan beside the lobby waterfall. "If the machine stalls on live feed, we're done," he said. Sloan's reply was glacial: "Then make sure it doesn't stall." Pressure calcified into desperation. An engineer rigged a hidden USB drive containing pre-generated results. A lab tech rehearsed the precise timing of swapping cartridges under the camera's blind spot. Eleanor learned of the ruse through hallway gossip and felt her stomach fold. That evening she copied her notebook, sealed the duplicate in an envelope, and slid it under the door of Miles O'Rourke, an investigative reporter she had once met at a Stanford alumni mixer. Launch day dawned crystalline, Bay Area fog obligingly absent. Reporters clustered around the Prism like pilgrims at a relic. Sloane narrated each step, voice silk over steel. The volunteer, a smiling pharmacy employee, offered a finger. Blood pooled in a micropipette. The cartridge clicked into place. The machine whirred, lights blinking serene teal. 60 seconds felt like 60 years. Finally, the printer spat out a page proclaiming all parameters within normal range. Applause erupted, flashbulbs burst, headlines wrote themselves. Drop of blood, quantum leap. That night Miles O'Rourke published an article titled Behind the Prism. Data doubts at Perimeter Diagnostics. He referenced undisclosed memos, recycled lab data, and staff rehearsals for the demo. The piece stopped short of outright fraud accusations, but the insinuations were flammable. Sloane dismissed it as sensational conjecture by a clickbait blogger, yet phones at Perimeter rang nonstop. Regulators, partners, jittery investors seeking reassurance. The board convened an emergency session at the Rosewood Hotel in Menlo Park. Sloane arrived armed with glossy slide decks and a rehearsed defense. The article relied on disgruntled ex-employees and misunderstood technicalities. But halfway through her presentation, Rajiv slid a manila folder across the table. Raw essay logs contradicting Sloane's claims. His voice trembled as he spoke. "We can't cure diseases by lying about them." Silence followed, broken only by the hum of air conditioning. The chair of the audit committee closed her laptop slowly, as if sealing a crypt. Within 48 hours, the pharmacy chain suspended the rollout. The Danish pension fund demanded a forensic audit. The mutual fund dumped its stake, shrinking Perimeter's valuation by 70% overnight. Employees found badge access disabled. Attorneys found document shredders still warm. The SEC arrived with subpoenas. The FDA followed with inspectors. In the chaos, Sloane attempted to rally loyalists, but NDAs crumble under immunity deals. Rajiv, Eleanor, and 3 engineers supplied regulators with chat logs and video of cartridge swaps. The whirlwind they had helped build now fed on confession. Sloane was indicted on counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to defraud investors. During the trial, she maintained that her only crime was optimism ahead of the curve. Jurors watched a replay of the livestream demo alongside outtake footage revealing the hidden USB drive. Conviction was swift, 11 years in federal prison, restitution exceeding any cash she still possessed. As marshals led her away, she passed a hallway monitor replaying her launch day mantra. The screen flickered, then went dark. Perimeter Diagnostics entered bankruptcy. The waterfall in its lobby fell silent, pumps switched off to save power. Former employees scattered to rival labs, CVs scrubbed of the Prism's name. Eleanor joined the FDA as an investigator. At night, the empty headquarters reflects the Palo Alto moon, its glass panes mirroring a caution no billboard can convey. In the rush to disrupt, truth is the first valve engineers override, and the last syllable investors hear before silence. The future still beckons, but it now does so through tempered glass, transparent, fragile, and impossible to ignore. Sunlight poured over the rolling hills between Siena and Montalcino, gilding endless rows of Sangiovese vines. At their center stood Tenuta di Castelloro, a 15th-century stone villa reborn as the headquarters of Italy's fastest-growing wine consortium. Tour buses lingered at its gates, influencers posed beside cypress trees, and critics compared the flagship Brunello to liquid velvet. Every label bore the motto Fide nella terra, faith in the land. No visitor imagined how fiercely that faith would be tested. The architect of Castelloro's meteoric rise was Gabriele Altieri, chief financial officer and master of unobtrusive charm. Where the flamboyant owner, Countess Bianca Ruzzi, dazzled journalists with tasting notes, Gabriele managed spreadsheets, supply contracts, and quiet promises to banks in Florence. He spoke gently, dressed conservatively, and kept a silver fountain pen tucked like a talisman in his breast pocket. To the vineyard staff he was il commercialista, a necessary but harmless steward whose domain ended at the cellar door. In the summer of 2017, Bianca unveiled an ambitious expansion plan: acquire 3 neighboring estates, double production, and build a boutique hotel overlooking the vines. Gabriele assured investors that financing was totally under control. The first tranche, Euro 28 million, arrived from a Milanese private equity firm eager to uncork global distribution. Construction cranes soon pierced the Tuscan skyline, clanging above the buzzing of cicadas. Yet invoices multiplied faster than scaffolds rose, and cement trucks idled longer than foundations poured. Enter Elisa Conti, a junior auditor from a regional accounting firm hired to satisfy due diligence clauses. Fresh out of Bologna Business School, she approached the assignment with the zeal of someone determined to impress. Her first red flag fluttered in a dusty file cabinet: purchase orders for French oak barrels from a supplier in Bordeaux that she could not locate online. The listed contact number rang to a prepaid mobile that disconnected after 2 tones. When Elisa asked Gabriel about it, he smiled. Small cooperages avoid publicity, he explained, tapping his fountain pen twice on the desk. Artisanal culture. Still, the oddities accumulated. Freight bills cited a trucking company in Medina that had dissolved 2 years earlier. A €600,000 payment for heritage stonework went to an account in Luxembourg rather than nearby Carrara. Elisa plotted the transactions on a timeline and noticed a pattern. Each suspect invoice appeared at month-end, just before Castelloro's cash balances flowed into a bustling sweep account, then vanished across multiple jurisdictions. She returned to Gabrielle's office at dusk, the villa corridors echoing with the distant hum of bottling machines. "I need original shipping manifests," she said, voice steadier than she felt. Gabrielle's reply was silk over steel. "You are thorough, Signorina Conti. But you risk delaying payroll with these digressions. Our people depend on punctuality." He held her gaze, smile unwavering. Elisa left carrying a leather folder of summaries, polished, empty of substance, and a new awareness of the power imbalance. Her firm billed Castelloro. Castelloro paid the firm. Ambitious auditors learned where curiosity stopped. That night, Elisa logged into the Italian company's registry and cross-checked every Castelloro vendor. 6 shell entities traced back to a single address in Malta, each controlled by Altieri Fiduciaria, a trust company listing Gabrielle's elderly aunt as director. Elisa printed the documents, heart drumming. She considered escalating to her manager, but he had once toasted Gabrielle at a Florentine wine fair. Friendship and fees intertwined like vines around a trellis. Meanwhile, the expansion creaked. Builders complained of unpaid retainers. An architect resigned after her invoices went unanswered. Bianca, distracted by export tours in Hong Kong, forwarded complaints to Gabrielle, who soothed her with earnest emails. "Minor liquidity waves, the harvest will settle them." He diverted €4 million from a grape futures hedge to cover interest on a bridge loan, recording the transfer as equipment upgrade. The ledger balanced if one ignored the widening hole beneath. In early October, a violent hailstorm shredded swaths of fruit, slashing production forecasts. Insurance would cover only half the loss, and Castelloro's creditors wanted updated numbers within 10 days. Gabrielle faced a wall of liabilities that no fountain pen could massage. He drafted a plan to request emergency capital from the private equity partners, framing the storm as an unrepeatable buying opportunity. Before sending, he needed audited figures, Elisa's figures, to look pristine. Elisa, however, had reached her limit. She drove to Siena at dawn and slipped her dossier under the glass door of the Guardia di Finanza, the Italian financial crime police, then waited in a cafe until 2 officers invited her to give a formal statement. As rain pattered olive leaves outside, she outlined the shell companies, fake barrel orders, and missing freight logs. One officer scribbled in a notebook, the other murmured, "Ponzi del Vino." The phrase lingered like tannin. Investigators descended quietly, posing as tourism officials inspecting export permits. They cloned server drives, photographed ledgers, and discovered that over 3 years Gabrielle had siphoned €18 million through the Maltese shells, channeling funds into a Monaco condo, a vintage car collection, and speculative cryptocurrency accounts now half vaporized. His method was mundane: false invoices, round-tripped consulting fees, but cloaked in the romance of Chianti sunsets it had thrived unchallenged. The arrest came during the annual Harvest Festival. Lanterns hung between barrels, guests sipped new rose, and Bianca prepared to thank her financial guardian angel. Instead, officers in plain suits guided Gabriel away, silver pen still in his pocket. Amid stunned murmurs, Bianca's crystal glass slipped from her hand and shattered, one more ledger gone to shards. News outlets seized the symbolism. Faith in the land, fraud in the ledger. Bankers froze credit lines. The hotel project stalled mid-frame, cranes abandoned like skeletal creatures against the sky. Workers, pickers, coopers, drivers, waited weeks for wages. Tourism slowed as curiosity replaced admiration. Visitors photographed caution tape where vines met unfinished concrete. Gabrielle negotiated a plea, citing pressure to meet the Countess's impossible timeline. Elisa's firm lauded her integrity, yet several wineries quietly dropped their audits, wary of such unflinching eyes. She accepted a position with the Guardia di Finanza, swapping vineyards for spreadsheets in Rome and learning to balance vigilance with the loneliness it invites. Each autumn, when grape-laden trucks crest the Tuscan hills, locals still recall the festival night the glass shattered. Castelloro endures under new management, bottles relabeled without the old motto. Faith, villagers say, now rests not in the land alone, but in the hands that measure, verify, and refuse to look away. Snowflakes floated past the clock tower of Munich's old city hall, drifting like patient secrets toward the Isar River. In a modern glass cube 2 kilometers away, Alpenpay AG projected a different kind of purity, contactless payments made effortless. Staff called the lobby's white atrium the Crystal Heart, a space where imitation birch trees shimmered under LED skylights. Every quarter, CFO Lena Vogel stood beneath those lights to announce record revenues, her Bavarian lilt soothing investors on live streams from Frankfurt to Singapore. Alpenpay's hook was simple. It processed online transactions for small retailers shut out by the giants. Lena, a one-time Deloitte star, insisted the firm could clear payments in 60 nations while settling currency risk in milliseconds. Analysts who questioned the miracle found their inboxes filled with glossy infographics and invitations to Oktoberfest-themed demos. By 2019, Alpenpay's valuation topped 24 billion euros, more than some German car makers, despite critics muttering that its audited cash seemed to migrate between subsidiaries like a tourist chasing sunlight. Among the skeptics was Tomas Ruby, a Czech forensic accountant seconded to the firm's outside auditor, Waldheim and Company. Tomas preferred numbers to beer halls, and he viewed Lena's footnotes the way an art restorer studies overpainted canvases. One footnote puzzled him. Alpenpay's Asian division reported 1.9 billion euros in annual revenue despite only a handful of full-time employees and no German banking license. The revenue was confirmed, Lena said, by escrow statements from a Singapore trustee named Sage Meridian Limited, a name that appeared nowhere else in global registries. Tomas flew to Singapore during Chinese New Year, streets blooming with lanterns. At the trustee's listed address he found a locked mailbox in a co-working space. The receptionist shrugged, "We just forward envelopes." He photographed the plaque, forwarding it to his senior partner with a two-line caption, "No desk, no staff, 1.9 billion euros revenue." The partner replied, "Confirm again, then let it go." Alpenpay was Waldheim's largest client. Audit fees paid for corner offices overlooking the Englischer Garden. Back in Munich, a whistleblower email landed in Tomas's encrypted inbox. The sender, signing only as Nebis, claimed that certain Asian merchants were phantoms, their transactions fabricated nightly by a script housed on an internal test server called Edelweiss 07. Check the log files after 2 o'clock Central European Time, Nebis wrote. You'll see packet storms that vanish by dawn. Tomas waited until the next audit window and requested raw server logs. Lena's team complied, sort of. The files arrived zipped, hashed, and conspicuously missing data between 1:45 and 3:15 each day. When Tomas asked about the gap, IT replied, routine maintenance. The missing hours chilled him more than any data could. He considered escalating to Germany's Financial Crimes Unit, BaFin, but whistleblowers' careers often ended on quiet lists no resume could erase. Instead, he reached out to Eva Stern, an investigative reporter at Der Merkur, whose exposés had toppled two regional banks. They met in a deserted beer garden at dusk, benches dusted with snow. Tomas handed her a USB stick and murmured, "If I disappear, publish everything." Eva nodded, voice solemn, "Not disappear, testify." Meanwhile, AlpenPay prepared for its biggest triumph. Inclusion in the DAX 30 index, a badge of national pride. Lena practiced her acceptance speech, perfecting a line about bringing German precision to global e-commerce. She never questioned the data feeds scrolling across her tablet. They were gospel she herself had written. Eva worked in secrecy, corroborating Nebe's claims with merchant databases, IP tracers, and midnight calls to supposed shop owners in Manila who had never heard of AlpenPay. Her draft article read like a thriller, but editors hesitated. Libel laws loomed large. They demanded a smoking ledger. That ledger surfaced unexpectedly. AlpenPay's British subsidiary filed a micro-company return at Companies House, listing a bank balance of £12 million. Lena had boasted of £1.4 billion in that very account during her latest webcast. A decimal misplaced? Hardly. The mismatch proved AlpenPay's cash was either missing or had never existed. Eva shared the filing with Tomas, whose pulse hammered in his temples. One document from a sleepy registrar had undercut a 4-year fairy tale. Publication could not wait. Der Merkur ran the headline at dawn. Phantom payments? AlpenPay's Asian revenues under the microscope. Shares plunged 32% before the bell. Lena assembled a war room, branding the report amateur speculation. But banks started freezing settlement lines. Hedge funds smelt blood. Short positions ballooned. BaFin announced a probe. Lena's face appeared on evening news beside the word betrayal, fraud. Waldheim and Company tried to salvage credibility, dispatching a crisis team to verify the Singapore cash. They found empty servers, dormant accounts, and an email trail linking Edelweiss 07 to Lena's deputy, Marcus Rabe. Under pressure, Marcus confessed. He had scripted dummy transactions to meet revenue targets, allegedly under Lena's verbal direction. Lena denied everything, yet messages recovered from her Signal backups showed heart emoji acknowledgements when Marcus reported, "Tonight's batch uplifts us above guidance." Armed officers arrested both in pre-dawn raids. Cameras captured Lena in a gray hoodie, no trace of Bavarian lilt as she muttered to her lawyer. AlpenPay filed for insolvency within a week. 6,000 employees faced a Christmas without pay. At the collapsed Crystal Heart, birch trees wilted for lack of maintenance, their leaves curling like confidential documents too long under heat. Tomas testified before Parliament's Finance Committee, voice measured but resolute. A deputy grilled him, "Why didn't you whistle-blow sooner?" He answered, "Because frameworks protect numbers better than people." The room fell quiet. Eva won journalism awards but admitted unease whenever she passed AlpenPay's shuttered HQ, its mirrored facade reflecting a city that prides itself on order. Lena received 8 years for market manipulation and accounting fraud. Marcus 6. Neither sentence restored pensions vaporized by phantom profits. Munich moved on, beer flowed, snow melted, but the skyline retained a cautionary glint. In auditor classrooms, instructors cite AlpenPay when teaching confirmation bias, reminding students that in finance, as in snowfall, silence can blanket deception until footsteps finally disturb the white. The marble lobby of Barings Bank's London headquarters gleamed under the afternoon lights, reflecting a lineage that stretched back more than 2 centuries. Portraits of sober-faced founders lined the walls, men who had financed wars and rebuilt empires. Yet in early 1995, a quiet tremor born thousands of miles away began to ripple through these corridors. At its center stood Nick Leeson, a young trader with an easy grin and a talent for making money appear out of thin air. Leeson's rise had seemed effortless. Fresh from a modest background in Watford, he slipped into the bank's Singapore futures office, a place executives viewed as a minor outpost. There, he handled trades on the volatile Nikkei index, contracts that rose and fell with Tokyo's restless stock exchange. Colleagues admired his stamina. He arrived before dawn, left past midnight, and spoke of yen and points the way other people discussed weather. The profits poured in so quickly that London gave him rare authority. He would place trades and record them. The dual role felt like a perk. In truth, it was a door left ajar. Every victory pulled him deeper into the glow of adulation. Regional papers dubbed him the king of the Nikkei. Senior managers back home accepted his numbers with barely a question. Christmas bonuses fattened. When he flew to England for meetings, secretaries whispered and analysts straightened their ties. Yet beneath the applause, Leeson carried a quiet dread. One humid August morning, a single miskeyed order produced a loss, small at first, then magnified by the market's sudden twitch downward. To hide the mistake, he opened an error account numbered 88888, a sequence he chose because in Chinese superstition it signified fortune. He convinced himself the slip was temporary. Given a day or two, the market would turn, and he would close the hole before anyone noticed. But markets rarely bend to desperate prayers. Losses deepened. To plug one breach, he dug another, chasing the vanishing line where recovery meets ruin. He bought even more contracts, doubling down like a gambler who believes the next spin will erase the debt. Some mornings he stood on the trading floor, tie loosened, watching screens flash red. He could almost hear the seconds dripping into the pit he had created. And still he smiled, cracked jokes, projected calm. No one suspected the cyclone disguised as a man. In London, executives toasted record earnings credited to his desk. They sent telegrams of thanks, even as Leeson wired back requests for larger limits. The bank, hungry for profit, obliged. Compliance officers leafed through forms that should have shown the warning signs: overconcentration, unverified positions, unrealized gains, but the paperwork arrived perfectly arranged. Leeson's dual authority meant he could paint the canvas any shade he liked. One evening in early January 1995, a small earthquake rattled Kobe, Japan. What followed was tragedy for thousands and opportunity for speculators. The Nikkei plunged as investors panicked. Leeson, already drowning, decided to bet on a swift rebound. He purchased immense quantities of futures, a wager that Japan's confidence would snap back like a rubber band. Instead, the index slid further. Each tick downward punched another hole through the hull of Barings Bank. Back in London, an internal auditor finally raised a question about the mysterious 88,888 account. The response came wrapped in jargon and reassurances. Just routine error clearing. Weeks passed. The auditor pushed again. This time papers arrived late, pages missing, signatures smudged. Something at last smelled wrong. On the last Sunday of February, the bank's chairman stepped from a black car into an emergency meeting room. Overnight faxes from Singapore showed a bottomless deficit, a figure so large it looked unreal. £827 million, more than twice the bank's trading capital. Phones rang in staccato bursts. Senior partners, many named Baring by blood, stared at the numbers as if letters of exile. Centuries of reputation evaporated between heartbeats. In Singapore, Leeson left a note on his desk. "I'm sorry." He boarded a flight to Kuala Lumpur, then another to Germany, shuffling through airports like a man half awake. Reporters later tracked him at a small hotel near Frankfurt, pacing tight corridors, head bowed. When Interpol agents closed in, the once celebrated trader offered no resistance. His voice, formerly buoyant, now floated barely above a whisper. He was 28 years old and carried the downfall of the Queen's oldest merchant bank in his duffel bag. Back home, clerks watched removal men wheel archives out of Baring's stately rooms. NG, a Dutch group, bought the remains for the ceremonial price of £1. For employees, shock mingled with disbelief. Some had spent entire careers within those walls, convinced the institution could outlast regimes and recessions. Yet a single trader's secret losses, concealed in 5/8, proved mightier than history. During trial, prosecutors painted Leeson as reckless, an architect of ruin. The defense spoke of systemic weakness, blind faith, and managers seduced by easy profit. The truth lay in the tension between both stories. Ambition met negligence and trust fell silent in the gap. Inside Changi prison, humidity pressed like a second uniform against his skin. Nights were long, lit by the faint hum of distant traffic. Leeson began teaching math to fellow inmates, scrawling fractions on chalk-pocked walls. Each lesson felt like penance, numbers tamed instead of unleashed. Outside, financial regulators rewrote rulebooks, demanding separation between those who risk and those who report. New controls sprouted across trading floors worldwide, thin safety rails inspired by a collapse few believed possible. Years later, released and graying, Leeson walked through London unnoticed. The city had sprouted glass towers where traders shouted into wireless headsets. He sometimes paused by the Thames, watching its unhurried current. The river had witnessed plagues, fires, coronations, and now the echo of his own missteps. He understood at last that markets may forgive, but memory keeps quiet ledgers of every hidden error. What remained was the lesson. Unchecked ambition can bloom into catastrophe with the silence of dusk settling over water. In the empty space where oversight should reside, a single person, armed with charm and access, can tilt an empire off its axis. And so the marble lobby of Barings stands only in photographs, a warning etched in the soft hush of the financial world, proof that even the oldest pillars can fall, not with a bang, but with the quiet keystroke of a solitary man. Wall Street at dawn feels almost reverent. The cavernous streets echo with distant horns, and the mirrored exteriors of the towers blush pink before the trading day roars to life. High above Broad Street, on the 19th floor of the Galleon Group's headquarters, Raj Rajaratnam leaned back in a leather chair and watched the city unspool beneath him. He was not tall, but he filled a room with kinetic calm, the assurance of a man who turned money into more money almost by instinct. From Bangalore to MIT to the richest zip code in America, his had been a story of pure ascent. Now, in autumn 2007, he managed a $7 billion hedge fund empire and liked to remind visitors that he listened to markets the way others listen to jazz. He also listened to people, restless scientists at chip makers, junior bankers hungry for promotion, executives flirting with the idea of betrayal. To them he offered precisely calibrated gifts: an introduction, a seat at a Knicks game, an envelope that whispered when set upon a desk. His staff called the network the mosaic. Each tiny shard of non-public truth, he said, formed a larger picture of where a stock would sprint next. The trades appeared prophetic. 1 week before a Silicon Valley firm unveiled record earnings, Galleon bought millions of shares. Hours before a pharmaceutical trial failed, the fund unloaded its position and quietly shorted the stock. Performance fees ballooned. Investors begged for allocation. To Raj, results were the measure of virtue. Legal, illegal, it's all noise, he once muttered to a trader after the closing bell. We play to win. Across the East River, in a drab Brooklyn office, Special Agent B.J. Kong sifted through phone logs obtained by subpoena. Kong had grown up in South Korea, where reverence for education ran deep. Now he pursued white-collar crime with the zeal of someone who still believed rules mattered. 4 months he traced odd bursts of trading volume that preceded earnings announcements. Again and again the trail curved back to Galleon. The pattern hinted at advanced knowledge, but patterns do not testify in court. Kong needed voices. By chance, a minor player cracked first. Room temperature coffee, 3 sleepless nights, and a reminder that perjury carried real time persuaded an anxious consultant named Anil to wear a wire. The next morning he met Raj for breakfast at the Four Seasons, a sanctuary of hushed chandeliers and starched linen. Anil's heart jackhammered under his suit as he slid into the booth, the microphone taped behind his tie knot. Raj greeted him with easy smile and mango juice. They spoke in soft Tamil about family weddings, then pivoted toward Intel's upcoming quarter. Anil whispered the revenue number, 3 billion, up 9%, leaked from a cousin in finance. Raj nodded, eyes half closed, savoring the information like a sommelier breathing a rare Cabernet. Later that morning Galleon snapped up call options worth $20 million. The recording landed on Agent Kang's desk with a satisfying thud. Now he had more than circumstantial ripples in the market. He had words, tone, intent. Still he wanted a lattice, not a twig. Over the next year he wired 6 insiders, an IBM salesman, a McKinsey partner, even a Wharton grad buried in Dell's investor relations team. One by one they met Raj in back booths of midtown sushi bars, on park benches overlooking the Hudson, in rental cars stalled on suburban cul-de-sacs. Each time they whispered numbers, shipment delays, boardroom quarrels. Each time Raj murmured thanks and later moved millions like a pianist moving scales. Inside Galleon the culture grew feverish. Analysts traded gossip the way athletes trade protein shakes, each desperate to feed the chief a tidbit that would light his eyes. Compliance memos, when they arrived, were treated as ritual theater. A risk officer once asked Raj whether an unfamiliar tip had been scrubbed. He chuckled, "Soap is for the dirty, my friend." By 2009 the financial crisis had gutted lesser funds, but Galleon posted double-digit returns. Raj hosted charity galas at Cipriani, spoke of immigrant grit, and donated laptops to inner-city schools. Yet a whisper of unease threaded through his evenings. He found himself studying faces, the junior trader who met his gaze a little too long, the receptionist who paused before patching through a call. Trust, so easy to demand, so hard to grant. Then at 6:15 a.m. on an October Friday, a fist hammered Raj's suburban door in Greenwich, Connecticut. Federal agents swarmed past manicured hedges, their breath fogging in the dawn. Kong stepped forward, badge out, voice steady. "Raj Rajaratnam, you are under arrest for securities fraud and conspiracy." The hedge fund titan appeared almost bemused. He reached for a blazer, smoothed his salt and pepper hair, and walked into the brisk air as shutters clicked and a neighbor's dog barked in confusion. News ricocheted through trading floors before the opening bell. CNBC anchors stuttered. Investors yanked $1 billion from Galleon in a single afternoon. In court, prosecutors played hours of recorded calls. Jurors heard Raj coaching a tipster, "Give me something I can sink my teeth into." They heard him assure a nervous mole, "This conversation never happened." The defense painted him as merely well-connected, just listening to market chatter, but the cadence of confidence had curdled into evidence. After 7 weeks, the verdict rang, guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 11 years, Raj entered the Federal Medical Center in Massachusetts with the deliberate gait of someone refusing to bend. He took long walks on the track, studied prison-issue textbooks on philosophy, and told a reporter the experience was another data point. Meanwhile, Agent Kong accepted a plaque from the U.S. Attorney, then moved on to the next case. The city's appetite for deception never rests. Years later, the towers of Wall Street still glitter at sunrise, but compliance officers now scan emails with algorithms tuned to odd verbs and sudden goodwill. Hedge fund managers think twice before answering unmarked calls. Yet the game persists, quieter, more encrypted. Somewhere a trader leans close, lowering his voice, convinced he has outsmarted history. The lesson hangs like fog in the glass canyon. Ambition, when fused to access and muffled by hubris, can make even whispers sound like certainty. But walls, no matter how high, keep secrets only until someone decides to listen. Callisto Tanzi liked to say that milk was the most honest liquid on earth, white as a clean ledger. From a cramped Parma storefront he built Parmalat into a global empire. Cartons stamped with sun-yellow daisies filled supermarket coolers from Lisbon to Buenos Aires. By the late 1990s the company's blue logo felt as Italian as opera or olive oil. Children learned to write their names on its giveaway calendars. Pensioners bought its bonds, convinced they were investing in breakfast itself. All the while Tanzi moved through airports trailed by admirers who whispered that he had married provincial virtue to modern finance. Yet honesty, like milk, spoils when left too long in warm rooms. Elisa Moretti, a junior treasurer stationed in Parmalat's glass headquarters outside Milan, first caught the sour note on a rainy Tuesday. Her task was routine: reconcile short-term cash with projected payments, but one column glared red. A Cayman subsidiary, Bonlat, supposedly held €3.9 billion in liquid assets. Bank of America had even issued a confirmation letter. The problem, Elisa realized, was simple. Every wire she tracked bled outward from Parma to vendors, salaries, taxes. Nothing ever flowed back from Bonlat. For a treasury flush with billions, the main accounts looked oddly parched. She approached her supervisor, a genial man who shrugged. "Intercompany timing," he said. "The money comes home at quarter end." Elisa nodded, yet saved screenshots to a personal folder. She had been raised on a dairy farm. Faint smells changed her world. This one lingered. Above them Tansy presided with folksy calm, quoting Dante during board meetings and gifting journalists boxes of chocolate milk. He preferred loyalty to brilliance. Anyone asking hard questions found themselves transferred to distant subsidiaries or eased toward early retirement. An outsider might have noticed that the chief financial officer rotated every 2 years, leaving behind few notes and many sealed envelopes. The illusion began to wobble in 2001, when auditors at Grant Thornton requested original statements for the Bonlat account. Tansy produced a crisp fax from the Cayman branch of Bank of America, complete with signatures and a seal. The auditors rubber-stamped it, perhaps dazzled by Parmalat's €7 billion revenue line. Had they bothered to phone the branch, a receptionist would have explained that no such account existed. No call was made. Far away in Genoa, financial journalist Marco Sartori prepared a Sunday column on Italian corporate debt. He noticed that Parmalat's leverage ratios were benign only because the famous Bonlat cash acted as ballast. A hunch tugged at him. Using contacts, Marco obtained bond prospectus footnotes referencing a mysterious credit-linked certificate, issued by a small bank in Singapore. The instrument claimed to insure Parmalat against default, on itself. Marco's editor killed the story worrying about libel. Still, Marco kept digging, leaving voicemails with traders who had begun shorting the company's stock. Meanwhile, Tansy's empire expanded into football clubs, travel agencies, even mineral water. Each venture lacked synergy but provided fresh places to park debt. When banks balked, Tansy's finance team issued mini-bonds marketed to Italian grandmothers promised 9% sicuro. The interest was paid from new bonds, cream poured to hide foam. By late 2003, global credit tightened. Banks demanded proof of Parmalat's liquidity. Deloitte, the new auditor, insisted on a direct confirmation from Bank of America. This time the fax machine stayed silent. Tansy's lieutenant, Fausto Tana, attempted a last resort. He instructed an employee to forge a PDF on Parmalat letterhead, attaching a doctored logo and a made-up phone number that rang to an empty office staffed by no one. The forgery was clumsy, a puddle disguised as a lake. Deloitte flagged the anomaly to Consub, Italy's market watchdog. Within 48 hours, trading in Parmalat shares was halted. Television crews camped outside headquarters, their floodlights revealing streaks of tension on employees' faces. Tansy called an emergency board meeting in a walnut-paneled conference room redolent of burnt espresso. He proposed selling the company's Brazilian dairy arm to raise cash. One director finally dared to ask, "Cash for what, exactly?" Silence answered. Investigators descended. They discovered that Bonlat's €3.9 billion never existed. The confirmation letter was fictional. Parmalat, once hailed for liquidity, was in fact missing €14 billion, Europe's largest bankruptcy to date. Funds had traveled through a labyrinth of offshore entities, returning only as photocopies. Bondholders faced ruin. Farmers who supplied milk awaited payment that would never come. Elisa watched agents box up ledgers she had balanced for years. She felt no vindication, only a chill like walking through an empty barn at dusk. Tansy was arrested while hiding at his daughter's apartment, wearing a modest sweater that failed to soften the image of a patriarch undone. Cameras captured his weary quote, "I was the company was me." It sounded more confession than defense. At trial, prosecutors displayed a flowchart resembling spilled spaghetti. Shell companies feeding one another invoices for powdered milk that never shipped, advertising campaigns that never aired, profits that existed solely in press releases. Tana testified that Tansy ordered the fabrications to protect the dream. Tansy murmured about market pressure and patriotic duty. The judge, unimpressed, handed him an 8-year sentence, later extended after appeals. Parmalat's bankruptcy estate clawed back assets. Tuscan villas, paintings, a yacht named Blue Dream. Much evaporated. Small investors picketed in Turin holding empty milk cartons stamped with the word traditai, betrayed. The Italian government orchestrated a slimmed-down successor company, but the sun-yellow daisies no longer felt innocent. Years later, in a modest office in Bologna, Elisa audited logistics software for a startup that delivered groceries by bicycle. Sometimes she paused by the chilled section of supermarkets, staring at rows of cartons under new corporate stewardship. She still drank milk but always checked the expiration date twice. Memory, she learned, curdles slower than dairy. On clear mornings, commuters driving past Parmalat's former HQ glimpsed the faded outline of the logo, sun-bleached but legible, a ghost brand haunting concrete. It whispers a caution older than finance. When something appears as pure as fresh milk, hold it to the light. Spoilage hides best in whiteness. In Munich's early morning hush, the glass facade of Wirecard's headquarters shimmered with the promise of a new digital age. Employees called the modernist complex spaceship, as if it had broken off from Silicon Valley and landed gently on Bavarian soil. At the top floor, CEO Marcus Braun adjusted his charcoal suit, gazed across the Isar River, and rehearsed his favorite prophecy. Cash is dead, data is king. Investors adored the line almost as much as the company's meteoric share price, which had lifted Wirecard into Germany's blue-chip DAX index, an honor once reserved for century-old industrial giants. Braun's ascent traced an improbable arc born to Viennese schoolteachers. He studied coding between night shifts at an electronics store, then joined a tiny payments processor in 2002 when online shopping was still a curiosity. Within years he had rebranded it Wirecard, stitched together a global network of merchants, and courted analysts with hypnotic charts pointing ever upward. At conferences he spoke softly, with pauses that felt like invitations to imagine tomorrow's fortunes. He wore black turtlenecks styled after a certain Californian legend, and assured everyone that Europe finally possessed its own tech messiah. Yet progress can mask complexity the way neon masks a cracked sidewalk. To handle transactions in Southeast Asia and the Gulf, Wirecard relied on third-party acquirers, obscure middlemen who supposedly processed credit card payments on the firm's behalf. Their revenues accounted for an outsized slice of profit, but the entities lived in jurisdictions where regulation breathed lightly. When skeptical analysts requested audited statements, investor relations staff produced slick decks instead, filled with futuristic buzzwords: tokenization, omni-channel, frictionless flow. The seams disappeared beneath the sparkle. Among the dazzled stood Jan Marsalek, Wirecard's chief operating officer. Tall, urbane, fluent in Russian and Mandarin, he cultivated the air of a cosmopolitan fixer. Rumors swirled that he traveled with multiple passports and once helicoptered to Libya for a private security demonstration. He assured colleagues that regulators, auditors, even foreign intelligence services respected his discretion. Staff half-joked that if Marcus Braun was the brain, Marsalek was the invisible hand. In April 2018, a lone journalist at the Financial Times, Dan McCrum, received an encrypted email from Manila. The sender claimed to have proof that Wirecard's Asian business was an illusion: forged contracts, duplicated invoices, backdated receipts. McCrum had chased corporate mirages before, but Germany's proud tech champion seemed an unlikely mirage. Still, he booked a flight, trading London drizzle for Manila humidity. In a windowless office above a karaoke bar, he met a nervous accountant clutching photocopies stamped with Wirecard logos slightly askew. The numbers told a strange story: merchant IDs repeating across supposedly unrelated clients, fees calculated out to the fourth decimal place. Too perfect, too symmetrical. McCrum's first article landed like a pebble in a fountain: mild ripples, then silence. Braun dismissed it as false, misleading, defamatory, hinting at short-seller conspiracies. Wirecard hired private detectives to shadow the reporter's sources. One whistleblower found a SUV idling outside her condominium every night for a month. Investors, calmed by Braun's serene interviews on Deutsche Welle, sent the stock climbing again. In a televised panel, he smiled gently and said, "We focus on innovation, not noise. But noise, when repeated, can become music." Over the next year, McCrum published more pieces, internal emails discussing round-tripping of funds, spreadsheets where revenue grew in neat diagonals, like a child's multiplication table. KPMG, brought in for an independent review, struggled to verify whether 1.9 billion euros, nearly a quarter of Wirecard's balance sheet, actually sat in Philippine trust accounts. Each time auditors requested confirmation, local bankers postponed meetings or faxed blurry statements. Marsalek assured them cultural misunderstandings were to blame. "Island time," he quipped with a grin. By June 2020, the dam buckled. Ernst & Young refused to sign Wirecard's annual report, citing the missing 1.9 billion euros. The figure was more than a gap. It was a chasm threatening to swallow years of credibility. Braun convened an emergency call at 3 a.m., voice thin, instructing deputies to locate the funds by dawn. Marsalek phoned Manila repeatedly, then vanished from the video conference, his camera blinking out like a dying star. On June 18, Braun walked into a press briefing under fluorescent lights that flattened every contour of his carefully curated mystique. He admitted the cash may not exist. Reporters sat stunned. One dropped a pen that clattered across the tiles, the sound echoing like a verdict. Wirecard's share price crashed 70% in 2 hours. Pension funds across Europe watched decades of patient savings evaporate before lunch break. 3 days later, Braun surrendered to Munich police, expression blank, as if still processing a bug in the code of reality. Marsalek, however, boarded a private jet from Klagenfurt, Austria, under a borrowed identity. Flight records ended in Minsk. From there, whispers placed him at a dacha outside Moscow, guarded by men who never removed sunglasses even at dusk. Back in Munich, administrators rifled through server rooms that smelled of dust and ozone. They found hard drives encrypted with phrases from Dune. They found marketing posters celebrating trust at scale. They did not find 1.9 billion euros. Wirecard collapsed into insolvency, the first DAX company ever to do so, leaving 5,000 employees adrift and regulators red-faced. The German financial watchdog, BaFin, admitted it had spent more time investigating short sellers than inspecting Wirecard's books. During court hearings, Braun spoke softly of unfortunate dependencies and actions taken without his knowledge. Prosecutors displayed emails where he thanked Marsalek for maintaining the Asian narrative. Today, the spaceship building stands half-lit, its lobby ferns browning under neglected LEDs. Tour guides of Munich's tech district sometimes pause outside, telling visitors how Europe's brightest star winked out overnight. They mention a line auditors now quote like scripture: "If you cannot touch the cash, assume it is smoke." Some evenings, Dan McCrum looks at the skyline from his London flat, the twilight reflecting off shard glass, and wonders where Marsalek hides. Perhaps the fugitive still pitches grand ideas to shadowy patrons, selling illusions woven from confidence and void. For in the realm of digital finance, trust is both the currency and the con. The lesson lingers in Bavaria's crisp air. Numbers, however polished, derive their power from belief. And when a handful of men learn to counterfeit belief itself, even the most advanced spaceship can drift, unmanned, into darkness. A brittle December wind stalked the canyons of Midtown Manhattan when Bernard L. Madoff stepped from the elevator of the Lipstick Building and paused, as if listening to a private metronome. 48 floors below, Christmas lights blinked in brokerage windows, their colors muffled by tinted glass. Madoff straightened his scarf, drifted toward his trading floor, and greeted clerks with a grandfatherly nod. No one watching that gentle procession could have guessed that, by nightfall, the most trusted name in long-term investing would be escorted away in handcuffs. For nearly half a century, the firm bearing Madoff's name had felt more club than company. Old guard clients from Palm Beach dropped in unannounced, handing over handwritten sheets of desired returns, 10% this year, 12% the next, while Bernie promised the impossible with the mild assurance of a man ordering tea. He had cultivated scarcity like a jeweler hoards flawless stones. New investors were told the fund was closed, then quietly admitted after months of ritual waiting. The resulting aura, part exclusivity, part mystery, hung over the operation like rare perfume. Up on the 17th floor, the investment advisory level few employees ever saw. Madoff's right-hand man, Frank D. Pasquale, clicked through Excel prints of imaginary trades. Each line represented a phantom block of blue-chip shares supposedly bought and sold with uncanny precision. The transactions never touched real exchanges. They lived only on dotted matrix printouts, destined for client mailboxes and dinner party show and tell. When D. Pasquale finished, he filed the sheets in a manila cabinet marked Strategies, and turned out the light. The room smelled faintly of toner ink and fear. Down in Florida, octogenarian philanthropist Carl Shapiro sat on the veranda of the Palm Beach Country Club sipping Darjeeling. He had known Bernie since the 1960s, had watched the younger man build a new class of electronic market making, and now entrusted him with hundreds of millions. Shapiro liked to say he slept better knowing Bernie's machines traded while he dreamed. If sleeplessness had begun to nibble at the edges of those dreams, Shapiro blamed age, not fraud. Back in New York, a single voice tried to break the spell. Harry Markopolos, a quiet quant from Boston, had reverse-engineered Madoff's alleged split-strike conversion strategy and found the math cruelly impossible. For 9 years he fed the Securities and Exchange Commission thick binders of warnings. Each binder ended in the same bureaucratic cul-de-sac. Too much prestige, too little proof, a reluctant shrug. Madoff's sponsors sat on the regulatory board itself. Conflict felt less like scandal than background hum. The real money, though, flowed from Europe. The Luxembourg Fund of Funds managers courted old Catalan textile families, then wired their fortunes across the Atlantic in discreet tranches. In London, charity treasurers burned after-hours oil rearranging portfolios so that a tasteful slice, never more than 15%, nestled with Madoff, lending humble British trust the sparkle of Wall Street sophistication. These layers of continental intermediaries gave the scheme both scale and smoke screen. Every added custodian became another wall a curious accountant would have to climb. Yet entropy is patient. The summer of 2007 brought a tremor to credit markets, and suddenly redemption letters multiplied. Madoff met them at first with cordial formality, wiring cash in punctual knots, soothing nerves. But as autumn 2008 arrived with the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the net redemptions widened to a chasm. In conference rooms that smelled of espresso and tension, Bernie tallied the requests. $7 billion he did not have. The fund's checking account, always lean by design, held barely $200 million. On December 9, he summoned his sons, Mark and Andrew, to the penthouse apartment overlooking the East River. They expected an update on the firm's shrinking market-making revenue. Instead, their father closed the door, lowered his voice, and uttered a phrase neither would forget: "It's all one big lie." For a moment the apartment felt undecorated, stripped to concrete and steel. Then came the mechanical details, backdated trades, fake DDC numbers, shredded trade blotters, and at last the exhausted confession: "I'm finished." The sons sought legal counsel, then contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 48 hours later, Special Agent Ted Cassioppi climbed into the elevator at the Lipstick Building with a plainclothes partner. They found Bernie behind his desk, eyes steady, hands folded as though waiting for a notary. "We're here to ask you about your trading," Cassioppi said. Madoff answered with the resigned clarity of a man describing weather: "There is no trading. It's all one big Ponzi scheme." Outside, traffic lights cycled from red to green, indifferent. News broke like a dam. Philanthropies canceled scholarship checks overnight. European funds suspended withdrawals. Penthouse lights blinked long past midnight across the Upper East Side as benefactors tried to recalculate shattered legacies. In Palm Beach, Carl Shapiro's teacup rattled against its saucer when the call came. 8 decades of discipline wiped out in the length of a voicemail. At the Boston offices of Harry Markopolos, the phone finally fell silent, the fight abruptly won, the victory tasting of ash. In court, Madoff sat beneath fluorescent buzz, hands cuffed but posture still princely. Victims filed impact statements thick as telephone books. Some demanded an apology, others preferred silence to the sound of his voice. When the judge pronounced a sentence of 150 years, the number felt less punitive than symbolic, a headstone for an era when trust itself had become a tradable commodity. Madoff rose, nodded slightly, and disappeared through a side door, leaving a hush more profound than outrage. Years later, analysts still searched the wreckage for moral heuristics. Greed, yes, but also belonging. Investors craved the comfort of an elder statesman, regulators the prestige of proximity, employees the warmth of unwavering routine. Madoff understood that the most resilient chains are forged not from secrecy but from shared flattery. By the time suspicion stirred, each link of that chain had grown too proud, too invested, to bend. And so, in the clamoring winter of 2008, the velvet-lined net closed, quietly, elegantly, around everyone inside it. The towers of La Défense rose like glass wards against the Parisian sky. Shortly after dawn on a Friday in mid-January 2008, a junior trader named Jérôme Kerviel scanned the equity derivative screens on Société Générale's Delta One desk. His badge still read, Assistant Trader, yet the numbers under his cursor, billions in notional futures and swaps, would have impressed a prime minister. He inhaled, flexed his fingers, and nudged another order toward Eurex. The click was soft, almost apologetic, but the position it birthed swelled the bank's hidden exposure to a sum larger than the French defense budget. Kerviel came from Pont-à-l'Abbé, a Breton town of fish markets and stone churches, light years from the grandes écoles that fed Parisian finance. He carried that outsider status the way other men carried heirloom watches, consulting it whenever promotion lists appeared. His superiors, eager for profit yet skittish about risk, had given him narrow authority to hedge client flow. Kerviel interpreted hedging as a stage and secrecy as a spotlight. Each afternoon, after supervisors drifted to strategy meetings, he unwound genuine client trades, then rebuilt them. Same product codes, new directional bets, layering forged emails to suggest offsetting positions in foreign accounts. Compliance software nodded at the phony symmetry and dozed again. Across the floor, risk controller Claire Duddle noticed a quirk. Kerviel's VAR value at risk printout spiked briefly at closing bell, then receded by breakfast as if the night had eaten the danger. She logged a ticket, but her manager, Daniel Sicard, shrugged. End-of-day glitch, he muttered. The phrase joined a small cemetery of overlooked anomalies. Odd timestamps, mirror trades always settling at zero, counterparty IDs that traced back to nowhere. Each flag fell because the trader in question generated steady, low-volatility earnings, perfectly aligned with the bank's year-end bonus pool. The Saturday before Epiphany, Kerviel rode the RER from Versailles to the 8th floor offices, circumventing weekend security with a borrowed pass. He canceled phantom hedges, freeing margin, then stacked new bets on the DAX and Eurostoxx indexes. The accumulated exposure now hovered near 50 billion. Roughly Société Générale's own market capitalization. He texted a friend from university, "Big week coming." The friend replied with a champagne emoji. Kerviel pocketed the phone without answering. Markets opened jittery on Monday, rattled by rumors of American subprime contagion. Futures in Frankfurt sagged, and Kerviel's massive bullish book sank with them. By Tuesday night the hidden loss crept past 1.4 billion. Panic edged his vision, but ambition pushed harder. He doubled down, purchasing additional futures as if courage alone could reverse continental sentiment. Screens glowed red, then purple. He added more forged emails, more fictitious hedges, turning deception into a recursive art. Wednesday morning, risk control audited position limits before the ECB announcement. A deviant figure refused to round down. Claire called Daniel. Daniel phoned the middle office clearing team. Numbers scud back and forth like frantic birds. At 3 p.m. the inquiry reached Jean-Pierre Mustier, head of investment banking. Mustier confronted Kerviel in a glass conference room that overlooked the wintry expanse of the Seine. Kerviel sat straight, palms poised, the cathedral spires of La Madeleine visible beyond the window. When Mustier asked whether the positions were real, the trader released a single exhale, long and uneven, and confessed. No outburst followed, just the sterile hum of fluorescent bulbs. A rogue position of 49.9 billion lay coiled inside the bank's books, large enough to rattle the Eurozone if mishandled. That night, Societe Generale's crisis team assembled in a basement war room painted an optimistic shade of blue. They chose the bluntest remedy: unwind everything before word leaked. Starting pre-dawn Thursday, execution desks sold DAX and Eurostoxx futures in tranches so colossal they shaved entire percentage points off the benchmarks. European traders noticed the avalanche but misread its origin. Some blamed U.S. recession fears, others an unwritten ECB memo. By close of trade Friday, the unwinding was done, and Societe Generale stared at a $4.9 billion. Wound, the largest trading loss any single person had ever inflicted on a bank. The news embargo snapped the following week. Headlines bloomed: Elite Trader FOU, the $7 billion blunder, France's Barings moment. Parliamentarians demanded hearings. The finance ministry mulled nationalization whispers. In Pont-l'Abbé, Kerviel's mother stopped answering her telephone, weary of reporters camped beside the bakery. Among La Défense cafes, conspiracy theories steamed. Was Kerviel scapegoat for deeper subprime damage? Had management secretly ordered the trades and feigned shock? Suspicion clung to raincoats and elevator small talk. Brought in for questioning, Kerviel arrived wearing a charcoal suit that fit like penance. He admitted falsifying emails and counterparties but insisted the bank implicitly encouraged risk. Prosecutors alleged he sought only bonuses and prestige. Somewhere between those poles lay a grayer motive. A young man determined to prove he could outtrade graduates of HEC and Polytechnique, to flip the class hierarchy that had once seemed permanent. Money mattered, but validation mattered more. The trial in 2010 felt half courtroom, half theater. Expert witnesses diagrammed margin calls on whiteboards. Judges leaned forward, puzzled yet fascinated. Kerviel listened, face calm, hands clasped, as if the narrative unspooling concerned a distant cousin. When sentenced to 5 years, he nodded once. Outside, rain traced silver diagonal lines across camera lenses. Reporters shouted questions about remorse. Kerviel offered a small Gallic shrug, a gesture at once humble and defiant. Societe Generale survived, buttressed by emergency capital and the convenient timing of an ECB liquidity wave. The bank recast itself as a champion of enhanced controls, installing biometric logins and behavioral algorithms that flagged traders who typed too fast or too erratically after 6 p.m. Weekly risk huddles now invoked Kerviel's name the way sailors once mentioned shipwrecks. Softly, for caution, not curiosity. Years later, pedestrians crossing the Pont de Berhakim might spot a lean figure strolling against the wind, shoulders squared, gaze drifting toward the water. Recognition seldom sparks. The city forgives through forgetfulness. Yet deep inside trading floors from London to Milan, a trace of his shadow lingers, a reminder that the boundary between hedge and bet, vigilance and vanity, can dissolve with a single unauthorized click. And somewhere in Brittany, when dusk settles over the slate roofs, villagers still recount the tale of the local boy who moved markets and nearly toppled a titan. Proof that ambition, when stirred with resentment and cloaked in forged confidence, can rewrite the ledger of an entire continent before the morning bell even rings. Houston's summer haze clung to the glass facade of 1400 Smith Street, where the blue E of Enron shimmered like a mirage on desert air. At 7:15 a.m., Jeffrey Skilling arrived in shirt sleeves, coffee cooling in one hand, a paperback of military strategy in the other. He liked to say the office was his battlefield and volatility the only honest compass. On the 34th floor, young analysts already clustered around dual monitors, parsing electricity prices as if reading omens. They called themselves the smartest guys in the room, half joke and half creed, and Skilling encouraged the legend with a brisk nod before vanishing into his corner suite. Below him, in a windowless enclave that smelled faintly of printer toner and ambition, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Fastow studied the architecture of a fresh, special-purpose entity. The shell companies carried names drawn from Star Wars: Jedi, Chuko, Raptor, because Fastow believed whimsy masked complexity. Each entity bought warehouses full of Enron stock on credit, then sold the imaginary gains back to the parent in time for quarterly reports. The loop turned market risk into revenue, debt into cash, and uncertainty into what Skilling liked to call earnings stability. Ken Lay, Enron's avuncular chairman, floated between these worlds like a stately moon, soothing investors with Midwestern warmth. When skeptics muttered that profit margins looked too sleek for a commodity business, Lay assured them deregulated energy was a new frontier. There would be bumps, yes, but whoever doubted the railroad barons? The comparison struck boards and pension funds as both impolite and irresistible. Money flowed in. Inside the trading pit known as Valhalla, a former academic named Lou Pai prowled the aisles, shirt untucked, tie crooked. He oversaw a unit that bundled long-distance weather futures with broadband capacity swaps, abstractions stacked on abstractions until even seasoned traders lost the thread. Pai's rule was simple: if you could imagine a contract, you could trade it. Enron's quarterly press releases translated those inventions into tidy growth curves. Nobody outside the building needed to know how surreal the underpinnings had become. Yet entropy seeped through the seams. Accountants in Arthur Anderson's Houston branch noticed that partnership footnotes sprawled across pages like ivy, obscuring who owed whom. A junior auditor named Leah Hart drafted a memo questioning why an entity called LJM2 paid Fasto a personal management fee while simultaneously guaranteeing Enron's share price. Her supervisor skimmed the memo, sighed, and filed it away. Anderson's consulting division relied heavily on Enron fees. Rocking the boat felt like mutiny. By autumn 2000, the stock traded above $90, more than 30 times projected earnings. Employees earning five-figure salaries found themselves nominal millionaires on paper, their 401(k)s swollen with company shares. The building's lobby cafe added a sushi bar. The parking garage upgraded to valet. But in the risk management department, analyst Sharon Watkins noticed revenue spikes that coincided too neatly with new entities, as though each freshly minted shell produced identical dividends. She compiled notes, tucked them into a white envelope, and slid it under Ken Lay's door one late September evening. Lay skimmed her warning, then convened a brief meeting with Fasto, who breezily explained the structures as hedges. Lay, ever conflict-averse, chose reassurance over confrontation. The envelope went back into a drawer. Meanwhile, Skilling surprised the board by resigning for personal reasons, pocketing millions in accelerated options and leaving behind a hazy trail of congratulatory emails. The move jarred Wall Street, but not enough to puncture the myth. Across town, reporter Bethany McLean at Fortune magazine dialed analyst numbers, asking a disarmingly simple question: how does Enron make its money? Answers arrived padded with jargon. One fund manager confessed off-record that he could not model the business but trusted the vision. McLean's article, "Is Enron Overpriced?" ran in March 2001. Enron's public relations team dismissed it as small-ball skepticism, yet inside 1400 Smith, a ripple of unease crossed the trading floor. Summer brought rolling blackouts to California, and Enron traders, caught on tape, whooped at each surge. "Burn, baby, burn," one voice crowed when a power plant unexpectedly shut down. The nation's outrage soon turned political, and Senate committees requested data. Fasto's labyrinth of entities, once conveniently invisible, now emitted the odor of cooked books. The market reacted as if the oxygen had vanished. Shares fell 20% in a day, then 40% the following week. Credit rating agencies that had championed Enron as model innovator slashed ratings to near junk, and counterparty faith collapsed like dominoes. Bank credit lines froze. Trading desks refused collateral no one could price. On November 8, a planned merger with Dynegy, an emergency lifeline, dissolved within hours when Dynegy's lawyers opened the books and recoiled. Their badges still unlocked doors, but nobody wanted to remain inside a building whose name had become a punchline. In conference rooms dotted with unplugged speakerphones, HR officers urged staff to diversify retirement accounts, grim advice delivered too late for many. December 2, 2001. Enron filed for Chapter 11, the largest bankruptcy in American history. Outside the courthouse, former secretaries, engineers, and support staff huddled together, staring at severance estimates measured in pennies. Television cameras panned to a protester's homemade sign, "From the smartest guys to the biggest lies." Criminal investigations spread like wildfire. Fasto, confronted with piles of partnership documents and the prospect of a century behind bars, accepted a plea, traded testimony for leniency, and described in clinical calm how he had balanced Enron's earnings on a rickety stool of debt and deception. Skilling, once the swaggering architect, insisted no fraud existed, only market misunderstandings. Lay professed heartbreak, blamed short sellers, and scheduled golf between depositions. The verdicts arrived years later, long after the trading screens went dark. Skilling received 24 years, later reduced. Lay died of a heart attack in Colorado before sentencing was finalized, leaving legal scholars to debate whether fate or justice wrote the final line. Enron's Neon E, salvaged from the rooftop, ended up in a Houston art museum, its glow ironic yet strangely subdued. Lessons were drafted in boardrooms worldwide: transparency, independence, whistleblower hotlines. Yet the human motives remained ancient: ambition disguised as innovation, fear muffled by consensus, greed softened by groupthink. In the quiet aftershock, one could stand on Smith Street at dusk and see only the reflection of passing cars and glass where the logo once blazed. The mirage had lifted, but the heat it left behind still shimmered in the memories of everyone who believed brilliance could replace balance. The glass walls of the Theranos headquarters on Page Mill Road glittered at sunrise, mirroring the sycamore-lined hills that framed Silicon Valley like a promise. Inside, the reception area smelled of jasmine candles and new circuitry, a curated blend meant to suggest both spa and laboratory. Visitors signed non-disclosure agreements on iPads while a looping video displayed a single crimson bead of blood traveling through animated microchannels, the company's red square logo pulsing beneath a soothing piano score. At the top floor, founder Elizabeth Holmes strode barefoot across carpet the color of desert sand, black turtleneck hugging her small frame, blonde hair twisted into a rope. She spoke seldom before 10 a.m. When she did, her voice dropped into a baritone that unsettled new employees but reassured investors. "We're not an iteration," she liked to say, "we're a revolution." The revolution fit neatly on a lab slide. A finger prick, a few microliters, and hundreds of diagnostic results returned in the time it took to order coffee. The promise dazzled retirees fearful of needles, generals dreaming of battlefield triage, and drugstore chains hungry for foot traffic. Yet beneath the frosted glass lay rooms partitioned by secrecy. Engineers on the first floor tinkered with Edison devices, boxy black machines the size of toaster ovens, yet never saw the chemical formulations upstairs. Chemists upstairs never glimpsed the velvet-lined demo room where visiting dignitaries watched choreographed test runs. Everything depended on silos, each stacked like a Jenga tower whose overall stability no single player could judge. A former Apple designer named Avi joined to perfect the device's sleek shell. On day 4 he asked an innocuous question: "Where's the cooling system for the reagent carousel?" A project manager answered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes: "That's handled." When Avi pressed, he received an invitation to a meeting that never appeared on his calendar. He learned quickly that curiosity could shorten contracts. Meanwhile, in a windowless corner of the basement, lab associate Erica Chung clicked through spectrometer readouts that refused to line up. Control samples wandered across expected ranges like lost tourists. She logged deviations, each flagged yellow, then red. Her supervisor, eyes rimmed with fatigue, leaned in and whispered, "Just repeat until it lands in spec." Erica nodded, heart thudding. Repetition felt less like science and more like roulette. Investor money rained in. First millions from venture icons, then hundreds of millions from scions of political dynasties, culminating in a valuation of $9 billion that crowned Holmes the youngest self-made female billionaire. She decorated conference rooms with framed quotes from Edison, Da Vinci, Yoda, "Do or do not, there is no try," and installed bulletproof glass around her office. Guards in inconspicuous polos paced the hall, hollering code walkthrough whenever non-employees strayed near labs. Skepticism appeared as faint drizzle, then steady rain. In late 2013, Alan Beam, the departing lab director, emailed Holmes a 12-point memo outlining irregularities: failed proficiency tests, unvalidated hardware swaps, diluted blood samples run on third-party Siemens analyzers while clients believed Edison did the work. Holmes called it noise and scheduled an all-hands to recommit the team to mission focus. Beam left, signing a separation agreement that muzzled him under threat of ruinous legal fees. The drizzle turned storm in February 2015. John Carreyrou, a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, received a tip. The box doesn't work. Carreyrou built a mosaic from fragments. Testimony from Beam, whispers from ex-employees, SEC filings buried in clerical dockets. When he phoned Theranos for comment, legal counsel David Boies, a litigator famed for decibels and victories, threatened consequences. The intimidation seemed odd. It also confirmed Carreyrou's hunch that the truth was brittle. Holmes went on the offensive, booking an interview with Mad Money. Bathed in studio lights, she told Jim Cramer that Theranos technology was the most important thing humanity has ever built. Her voice carried the gravity of moon landings. The stocky host nodded, dazzled. Shares didn't exist. Theranos was private, but confidence, the real currency, surged anew. Yet numbers kept misbehaving. Walgreens pharmacists called Theranos hotlines daily, reporting vitamin K tests reading 0 for living patients, liver enzymes yo-yoing within hours. Each complaint traveled a feedback loop that ended in silence. Inside the lab, Erica Chung crouched over a centrifuge and felt her tolerance snap. She copied data to a thumb drive, resigned, and typed a letter to federal regulators. Days later, in a beige FDA office, she described test runs rerouted to Siemens machines when VIP clients visited. The regulator listened, pen tapping, expression neutral. The tap echoed louder than any threat she'd feared. October 2015, 3 a.m. federal inspectors arrived unannounced, ID badges swinging. In the hallway, a compliance officer dialed Holmes, voice quavering, "They're here." Upstairs, Holmes paced barefoot, calculating variables. Sunrise found her smiling at investigators, offering espresso from a mahogany cart. She spoke of revolution again, but this time her baritone lacked resonance. It sounded like an algorithm searching for the next best phrase. The inspectors issued a scathing report: unreliable controls, unqualified staff, patient risk, immediate jeopardy. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services imposed sanctions, banning Holmes from owning or operating a lab for 2 years. Investors protested. Some filed quiet lawsuits. Others held on, hypnotized by her conviction even as the stage lights dimmed. In March 2018, the SEC charged Holmes and former President Sunny Balwani with massive fraud. She settled without admitting wrongdoing, surrendered voting control, and paid a token fine. But the criminal probe pressed on. 2 years later, federal indictments alleged wire fraud and conspiracy, the maximum penalty overshadowing even her hyperbole. Courtroom sketches captured her seated behind counsel, eyes focused on a point no one else could see. The trial, delayed by pandemic, began in the fall of 2021. Prosecutors paraded lab workers, oncologists, wounded investors. Defense counsel painted Holmes as a young visionary undone by over-optimism, quoting Silicon Valley's mantra, "Fail fast." Carreyrou sat in the gallery, notebook steady. Jurors leaned into audio of Holmes assuring the Department of Defense that Edison could detect bioterror pathogens. After 7 days of deliberation, the verdict arrived. Guilty on 4 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. Sentencing followed, 11 years and 3 months. The judge cited a stark betrayal of medical trust. Holmes blinked slowly, tears gathering but refusing to fall. The sheriff's deputy touched her elbow. She nodded, rose, and walked down a corridor that smelled of old varnish and consequence. Theranos signage came down. A biotech incubator now leases the space, its lobby filled with ethically sourced succulents. Engineers huddle over CRISPR rigs where Edison shells once collected dust. Some evenings, custodians claim, the automatic blinds malfunction, descending at twilight without command. Through the slats, they glimpse the hills beyond Page Mill, their outline tinged red by the setting sun. A color reminiscent of a single drop of blood, bright, beautiful, and never as transparent as it first appears. On a spring morning in 2012, the citizens of Dixon, Illinois, gathered along the Rock River to watch the dogwood trees bloom. The town, population 15,000, was proud of its frugal reputation. Every council meeting opened with reminders about patching potholes and stretching snow removal funds. And at the center of this careful balancing act stood Rita Crandall, the city comptroller, a woman whose quiet efficiency seemed as dependable as sunrise over the riverbank. Rita was 59, slight and unfailingly polite. She wore pastel cardigans and spoke in a voice softened by Midwestern courtesy. Residents joked that if you dropped a penny on the sidewalk, Rita would record it in the ledgers before it stopped rolling. She had managed Dixon's books for more than 2 decades, guiding mayors through recessions and floods, always emerging with balanced budgets and a faint, satisfied smile. When she asked for signatures, aldermen signed without reading. When she proposed an investment, they nodded on reflex. Trust in Dixon wore Rita's spectacles. Yet 30 miles outside town, past fields of soy and corn, stood Meritage Farms, a sprawling equestrian estate that looked lifted from Kentucky bluegrass country. White-railed paddocks stretched toward the horizon, and barns gleamed cherry red against the sky. Visitors whispered about the price tags. $150,000 broodmares, horse trailers the size of apartments, a mahogany-paneled viewing lounge scented with cedar and sweet feet. At the center of this immaculate world walked the very same Rita, only here she wore tailored riding jackets and spoke the brisk, jargon-laden dialect of competitive quarter-horse breeding. Some locals knew she loved horses, few grasped the scale. Rita has a hobby, they said, imagining a backyard stable. They did not picture auction rings in Texas where bidders waved numbered paddles at six-figure maras, nor did they hear Rita's phone hum with wire transfer alerts from banks as far away as Florida. She traveled often to shows, Ocala, Scottsdale, Fort Worth, returning with ribbons and an ever-growing menagerie. Whenever someone asked how she financed it, she laughed gently. "I invest," she said, offering no details. People assumed a modest inheritance or shrewd stock picks. In small towns, polite assumptions keep the peace. Lisa Madigan, a young clerk in the treasurer's office, first sensed disquiet while reconciling the city's motor fuel tax receipts. The state sent Dixon roughly $300,000 each quarter, yet their own ledgers reflected far less. Lisa flagged the mismatch, believing it a clerical delay. Weeks passed, the difference persisted, and Lisa mentioned it to Mayor Burke during a coffee break chat. The mayor, loyal to Rita, replied, "I'm sure she's got it handled." Lisa nodded but quietly kept notes. That winter, the mayor contracted a Chicago accounting firm, Clifton Larson, for an unrelated municipal bond project. One associate, Ryan Marks, requested routine bank statements from the city's primary account. Rita mailed them promptly. Yet Ryan noticed that one statement referenced an unfamiliar account ending in 029. Its header read simply RSED. Assuming a minor fund, he asked Rita for those statements too. She promised to send them after lunch but never did. Curiosity, like a loose thread, can unravel a tapestry. Ryan pulled. The bank confirmed that RSED was indeed a city account, opened in 1990, with sole signing authority granted to Rita Crandall. Its balance exceeded $5 million, astonishing for a town whose entire annual budget barely reached $10 million. Ryan called the mayor, voice low, suggesting an urgent meeting. Inside council chambers, the confrontation was almost gentle. Rita arrived in a powder blue blazer, carrying a leather binder. Ryan presented the numbers. Transfers siphoned from legitimate city accounts into RSCD, then wired to Rita's personal checking or to horse auction houses. Over 22 years, the total exceeded $53 million. The room fell silent long enough for the wall clock to tick 3 full minutes. Finally, Rita sighed, removed her glasses, and said, "I suppose you'll need my keys." The FBI arrived the next morning. Agents photographed file cabinets, downloaded spreadsheets, and followed a paper trail as smooth as freshly laid asphalt. Forged signatures, fictitious invoices, bank slips marked sewer capital, masking wires to equine supply firms. Rita had begun small. 25,000. Here. 30,000. There, testing the waters like a swimmer dipping a toe. When no alarm sounded, she grew bolder. The scheme became routine. Each time state funds arrived, she carved a slice for horses, then adjusted the books to conceal the wound. Dixon's infrastructure crumbled quietly, potholes deepened. A planned riverfront bike path never materialized. Taxpayers grumbled, never suspecting their money grazed in distant pastures. Reporters descended on the sleepy town, microphones poised. Neighbors stared at Rita's modest ranch-style house, bewildered that it sheltered a secret millionaire. In interviews, former mayors expressed hurt. "She ate at our tables," one said, voice trembling. The betrayal felt intimate, a violation not of finance alone but of community. At trial, federal prosecutors outlined the embezzlement with almost clinical calm. They displayed glossy photos of stallions, trailers, jeweled bridles. Jurors gasped at the sums. $725,000. For a single mare named Pizzazzy Lady, $2.1 million in transport fees over 4 years. Rita, in gray prison garb, listened without visible emotion. Her defense offered no elaborate theory, only that she loved horses and lost control. She entered a guilty plea, sparing the town a protracted spectacle. Judge Philip Reinhardt sentenced her to 19 years, calling the crime extraordinary in its duration and magnitude. Dixon received partial restitution through auctions of horses and property, yet the ledger would never fully balance. Roads remained scarred, civic projects sat unfinished, trust was harder to pave than asphalt. On the day Rita left for federal prison, April rain fell over Meritage Farms. Workers loaded prize maras into trailers bound for auction. The paddocks, once bustling, stood empty, their white rails reflecting in shallow puddles. Back in Dixon, Lisa Madigan walked to the riverfront after work. She leaned on the railing, listening to water slip past limestone banks, and wondered how long a town needs to unlearn misplaced faith. She felt no triumph, only a quiet resolve to reread every line, question every assumption, and remember that on the calmest surfaces, currents may still run deep. Lisa turned toward City Hall, lights glowing in the dusk, and took a slow breath. The budget season was coming, and the numbers at last were hers to guard. The Izar River lay silent beneath a violet dusk when Marcus Braun stepped from a black Audi and strode into Wirecard's glass headquarters on Einstein Ring. Inside, LED panels pulsed the company's new motto, "Beyond Payments," across a foyer scented with espresso and ambition. Braun, in his hallmark black turtleneck, moved without haste, as though every hallway already belonged to his imagination. In the executive suite on the 4th floor, he paused at a panoramic window. Below, coders in hoodies volleyed ideas about digital wallets. Above, a neon skyline promised Munich's rise as Europe's Silicon Valley. All that remained, Braun told himself, was to keep the story spinning long enough for reality to catch up. Wirecard had begun modestly in 1999, processing credit card payments for online pornography sites that traditional banks shunned. 2 decades later, it sat in the DAX 30 index beside BMW and Siemens, its valuation north of 20 billion euros. Analysts christened it Europe's PayPal, and German politicians hailed Braun as proof that the continent could still mint tech champions. Yet the firm's growth curve resembled a staircase cut by a trembling hand, flat months of quiet followed by sudden leaps fueled by acquisitions in Singapore, Dubai, Manila. Each leap required faith that vast pools of transaction revenue lay just out of view, waiting for auditors to confirm. Jan Marsalek, Wirecard's jaunty chief operating officer, supplied that faith in abundance. Where Braun exuded cerebral calm, Marsalek radiated restless energy, dashing through security gates, whispering about next-gen crypto protocols, arranging midnight flights to Manila or Moscow. He kept a spare Austrian passport in his office safe and carried a leather notebook etched with 3 unlisted phone numbers. Employees called him Der Magier, the magician, half in awe and half in fear. Trouble arrived first as footnotes. In 2015, a whistleblower in Singapore emailed Wirecard's external auditor EY, describing round-tripping schemes in which the company sent money to third-party partners one day and received it back as purported revenue the next. The memo vanished into compliance folders already swollen with similar murmurs. Meanwhile, Braun took the stage at tech conferences, promising frictionless finance for a borderless world. Investors, hungry for a European unicorn, applauded on cue. Across the channel, Financial Times reporter Dan McCrum noticed an anomaly. Wirecard's Asian profits grew faster than its Asian headcount. He published a cautious blog post headlined, "House of Wirecard." Within hours, Wirecard's attorneys fired back. accusing McCrum of colluding with short sellers. The share price dipped, then rebounded twice as high after Braun announced a $200 million buyback. German regulators opened an investigation, not into Wirecard but into the journalists and hedge funds betting against it. Confidence for the moment was restored. Inside Einstein Ring, Marsalek hosted weekly war room huddles. Managers projected maps dotted with small payment processors supposedly feeding billions into two trustee accounts at Bank of the Philippine Islands and BDO Unibank. No one from headquarters had ever visited the vaults. Photographs of deposit certificates circulated by email, fuzzy as old postcards. When Finance Director Suzanne Steedle requested independent confirmations, Marsalek laughed. "We need to think in milliseconds, not signatures," he said, then ordered sushi for the room. By late 2019, rumors invaded even celebratory moments. At the company Christmas party, engineers toasted a new cloud payments API while speculating about why KPMG's special audit kept slipping deadlines. In January 2020, KPMG delivered a draft it could not verify. 1.9 billion euros. Roughly a quarter of Wirecard's balance sheet, allegedly held in Philippine escrow. Braun brushed off the finding as delays in document transit. The board extended the publication of annual results, blaming the pandemic. Shares wobbled but held. June 18, 2020, dawned humid in Munich. At 8 a.m. Wirecard issued a terse ad hoc release. The auditors had refused to sign off because the 1.9 billion euros does not exist. The phrase sliced through trading screens like a siren. Within 2 hours the stock lost 60%. By closing bell it had shed 90%. Braun called an emergency press conference, the turtleneck now hanging loose at the collar. "We are the victim of a massive fraud," he said, voice even, eyes flat. Reporters asked who exactly had perpetrated it. Braun offered no names. That night Marsalek vanished. Security footage captured him exiting Vienna airport and melting into the shadows near a private jet hangar. June 25th, Wirecard filed for insolvency, the first DAX component ever to collapse. In conference rooms still heavy with the scent of spilled cappuccino, stunned employees calculated severance against mortgages. Braun surrendered to Bavarian police, led away in discreet shackles, escorted past a mural that once celebrated Wirecard's inclusion in the German Blue Chip Index. Investigators alleged he had signed false statements for years, propped up by forged escrow letters printed on doctored bank stationery. Braun insisted he, too, had been deceived. Prosecutors countered with email trails where he approved fees wired to opaque Dubai entities minutes before quarter end. Parliamentary hearings summoned regulators who admitted they had relied on Wirecard's own explanations. BaFin, Germany's financial watchdog, had even banned short selling of the stock in 2019, citing market-threatening speculation. Lawmakers stared at the floor as auditors recounted ignored red flags. Identical revenue patterns across unrelated regions, addresses that mapped to empty lots, trustees who did not recall signing contracts. In April 2022, Braun's trial opened in a high-security Munich courtroom. He entered in a tailored navy suit, hair trimmed, demeanor monk-like. Witnesses described conference calls where dissenting managers were muted, then sidelined. One IT engineer told of scripting code that backfilled missing transaction IDs minutes before auditors arrived. The jury, handed ring binders thick as telephone books, listened as expert after expert explained how numbers can masquerade as fact when trust stands guard at the gate. Wirecard's campus is now a co-working hub for biotech startups. The lobby logo remains, letters unlit, an ironic art piece in a hallway that smells of fresh paint. Visitors sometimes stop, recall headlines, and shake their heads. They speak of technological bravery, of regulatory sleepwalkers, of a magician still at large. More often they simply point to the missing billions, money that never was yet still managed to buy reputations, elections, and hope. The saga left Germany wary of homegrown heroes and taught investors, auditors, and ministers a lesson as old as bookkeeping. A balance sheet, like a mirror, can be polished until it reflects whatever the beholder wishes to see. And once the illusion cracks, The shards cut deepest those who dared to believe they were gazing at the future. Evan McAllister's corner office on the 24th floor of Glencourt Energy overlooked the lazy bend of the Houston Ship Channel, a view he once compared to a river of income. For a decade, the company had posted quarter after quarter of record profits, each announcement accompanied by Evan's trademark, almost bashful grin at the investor podium. Analysts praised him as the quiet visionary of the natural gas revolution. Under the warm Texas sun, his rise felt inevitable, almost fated, and no one wanted to spoil the optimism with awkward questions. Yet questions did exist. They collected in the head of Mara Delgado, a mid-level accountant who preferred numbers to people and coffee to conversation. Mara noticed that the debt schedule in the internal books never quite matched the one released to shareholders. It was a tiny mismatch, $5 million at first, then 10, easy to dismiss as rounding in a $15 billion enterprise. Still, she saved every version of the spreadsheets on a thumb drive, a quiet ritual performed at dusk when the bullpen emptied and the motion-activated lights clicked off row by row. Evan, for his part, cultivated an air of gentle detachment. He spent his mornings pacing the glass walkway that connected the executive suite to the private gym, murmuring into a headset about virtual pipelines and synthetic capacity. To younger employees, the jargon sounded like the future. To board members, it sounded like money. No one paused to ask what exactly a synthetic pipeline was, or how it could earn 20% returns in a market where actual pipe and steel projects struggled to break even. On a humid August evening, Glencourt announced a dazzling new partnership with a Swiss commodities bank. The press release promised an influx of capital, lower risk, and an innovative accounting treatment that would unlock shareholder value. Evan spoke softly, almost soothingly as cameras flashed. In the audience, Mara clutched a legal pad and felt a chill. The so-called partnership looked, to her eyes, like a loan in everything but name, yet the liability never showed up on the balance sheet. Somewhere amid the footnotes, risk had been described as revenue and nobody blinked. Weeks turned into quarters and the mismatches grew. 5 million became 50, then 200. Glencourt's stock price soared all the same, buoyed by conference call promises of overseas expansion. Evan bought a ranch west of Austin and an abstract sculpture that resembled a looping Mobius strip. He liked to say it symbolized infinite growth. At holiday parties he remained gracious, even humble, serving bourbon himself and asking interns about their families. His gentle drawl and steel-rimmed glasses projected honesty, and people wanted to believe. Mara finally confided in Theo Price, a careful auditor from the external firm whose tidy spreadsheets mirrored her own. Late one night they compared ledgers under the harsh light of an empty conference room. What emerged was a latticework of special-purpose vehicles, shell companies that bought and sold energy contracts to one another at pre-agreed prices, booking immediate profit while hiding obligations deep in unpublished subsidiaries. In plain language, Glencourt recorded revenue on deals that would not bring real cash for years, if ever. All the while liabilities sat off the books, growing like weeds behind a manicured hedge. Theo urged caution. Careers had been crushed for less. He suggested anonymous inquiries, quiet nudges to the SEC. Mara nodded but felt a curdled resolve. She remembered her father's hardware store, how he balanced his register each night down to the cent, insisting that money behaves if you treat it honestly. The thought that billions could vanish through a few euphemisms struck her as obscene. Meanwhile, Evan grew restless. Market reporters whispered about stalled overseas permits, and one investigative journalist asked for an interview about the Swiss partnership. In the boardroom, Evan stayed placid, yet his private emails dripped with urgency. Sell marginal assets, accelerate contract rollovers, find fresh capital. The empire required constant feeding, and new deals were starting to cost more than they earned, like borrowing one credit card to pay another. The collapse began not with a revelation but with a rumor. A short-selling firm released a terse report titled Glencourt's House of Paper. It questioned the timing of profits and pointed to the ballooning, though undisclosed, debt in certain Cayman entities. The stock dropped 8% before lunch, 20% by the closing bell. Analysts demanded clarity, hedge funds demanded collateral. Evan appeared on television, hands clasped, assuring viewers that our fundamentals remain strong. His measured tone, once comforting, now felt rehearsed, even hypnotic. Inside headquarters, panic hummed beneath polite greetings. Printers churned, shredders whirred. Mara and Theo forwarded their documentation to regulators, attaching a note that began, "We believe immediate action is warranted." They were not alone. A junior trader, worried about personal liability, had already handed over emails detailing fabricated energy price curves. The walls were closing in from multiple angles, a quiet siege advancing on polished marble floors. When the SEC subpoena arrived, Evan retreated to his office, closing the frosted glass door. Through the pane he could be seen staring at the skyline, as if searching for the familiar curve of the ship channel through a gathering fog. By week's end, Glencore restated 4 years of earnings, revealing billions in hidden debt. The stock fell to pennies, retirement funds evaporated, and the Mobius sculpture was carted away by liquidators, its promise of infinity reduced to polished scrap. Evan surrendered to federal marshals one October dawn, stepping into the humid Houston air in the same gray suit he had worn during triumphal press conferences. Reporters shouted questions about remorse, about the betrayed employees, about the families who tied their futures to phantom profits. Evan said nothing. He merely adjusted his glasses as though clearer vision might change the scene before him. In a smaller office 2 floors below, Mara packed a cardboard box with her belongings, a ceramic mug, a calculator, a photo of her parents at the hardware store. She felt no triumph, only a muted sadness, like the hush that follows a storm tearing through familiar streets. Trust, once fractured, does not mend easily. Yet she hoped that somewhere in another firm, someone would remember Glencore's fall and pause before turning risk into revenue with a keystroke. She powered down her computer, slipped the thumb drive into her pocket, and walked toward the elevator, the overhead lights flickering off behind her, one by one. The offices of WirePay AG rose like brushed steel monoliths above a quiet industrial park on the edge of Munich. Every morning, employees stepped through glass doors etched with the company's slogan, "Trust, Transact, Transform," and felt as if they were entering the future. Digital payment volumes were doubling each year, the share price had climbed 12-fold in a decade, and the CEO, Markus Braun, was hailed in talk show studios as Germany's answer to Silicon Valley. Investors loved the narrative, a homegrown fintech champion muscling past the lumbering old banks. At the center of the storm stood the elusive chief operating officer, Jan Marsalek, only 37, fond of Seville rose suits and sudden disappearances. One week he would be in Singapore, dazzling Asian venture funds with PowerPoint slides of colored arrows. The next he would surface in Cyprus or Dubai, whispering about encrypted wallets and unbanked millions. Colleagues spoke of him with a mix of envy and awe. "He knows everyone," they said, lowering their voices, "and everything." Across town, Benedict Schwartz, a financial reporter with slightly threadbare jackets and a talent for polite persistence, stared at a spreadsheet whose columns refused to add up. The figures had arrived by courier, slipped from a brown envelope along with a note, "Look at the cash." Benedict had been covering WirePay for years and admired its audacity, yet he had never managed to reconcile the company's booming profits with its slender cash flows. A global payment processor should gush liquidity, like a toll booth collecting coins. WirePay seemed to run on promise, not pennies. Benedict called up bank filing databases, cross-checked subsidiary names, and noticed that the bulk of WirePay's profits came from 3 little-known partners in the Philippines, Singapore, and Dubai. Each supposedly processed transactions on WirePay's behalf. Each also claimed to hold, in escrow, hundreds of millions of euros that belonged to WirePay's European balance sheet. Yet the audit trail ended in photocopied letters and blurred signatures. In the spring of 2019, a warm breeze carried the scent of linden blossoms through Munich's boulevards. Inside WirePay, auditors from Ernst & Young arrived for their annual review. Markus Braun welcomed them with soft Viennese courtesy. Jan Marsalek arrived late, breathless from the airport, scattering mint tablets on the polished table. He produced, with flourish, 2 banking confirmations from BPI and OCBC, Asian lenders outlining vast trust accounts in WirePay's name. The auditors photographed the letters, noted the balances, and ticked the boxes. Yet a junior associate, Helena Fisher, frowned. The documents bore no digital verification codes, only rubber stamps. Helena asked whether she might speak directly with the banks. Marsalek flashed a quick smile, explaining that time zone differences made calls difficult. Still, he promised access soon. The meeting adjourned, pastries were served, and conversations drifted to football. Helena, however, could not shake the unease, especially after Marcus Braun, during a hallway chat, referred to the escrow money as a mere technicality. Months later, Benedict's editor agreed to publish a cautious probe. The headline ran in the Tuesday business section: Mystery Cash Clouds FinTech Star. WirePay spokesperson dismissed it as rumor-mongering by short sellers. The stock dipped 3%, then climbed again as analysts issued buy notes. Confidence, once installed, had its own gravity. But the probe pried open a door. Regulators at BaFin, embarrassed by whispers that they favored the hometown hero, summoned WirePay's executives for clarification. Marcus delivered polished slides, growth curves, geographic maps, testimonials from pleased merchants. Jan Marsalek, tireless, spoke of revolutionary micropayment rails, quoting William Gibson. The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. The regulators nodded. The meeting ended in smiles. Only Helena Fisher refused to move on. She booked flights to Manila and Singapore, paying from her own pocket, unsure whether the firm would reimburse her. Once on the ground, she visited the listed offices of WirePay's partners. In Manila, she found a single locked room inside a half-empty strip mall. In Singapore, a mailbox service behind a yoga studio. When she tried to schedule a visit to the supposed trustee bank, the receptionist said, "We don't offer escrow accounts of that size." Helena felt the odd vertigo that precedes disaster, the moment when one realizes the floor is made of painted glass. Meanwhile, Jan Marsalek vanished again, this time claiming he had urgent meetings in Beirut. 3 days later he texted Marcus an encrypted note. "All set. We'll send files Monday." Monday passed. No files. Marcus grew pale, investor calls multiplied. Benedict received a second envelope, containing internal emails in which executives begged Jan for bank statements, and he replied with emojis. In June 2020, WirePay delayed its audited results for the third time. The share price wobbled like a candle flame. Helena, back in Munich with photographs of empty offices, met the audit committee and outlined her findings. Silence draped the room as she finished. One director finally whispered, "So the cash doesn't exist?" Helena nodded. The next morning, Marcus Braun phoned BaFin and admitted that 1.9 billion in escrow funds were likely missing. The phrase circulated through newsrooms with chilling speed. At 9:15 a.m., trading in WirePay shares was halted. By noon, police entered headquarters, their footsteps echoing across the marble foyer that once hosted product launches and champagne toasts. Jan Marsalek could not be found. Airport logs showed he had flown to Minsk, then disappeared from radar. Rumors placed him in Moscow, Kuala Lumpur, Tripoli. Interpol issued a red notice. Tabloid headlines called him the man without a shadow. Marcus Braun, more subdued, surrendered to authorities, a folded trench coat draped over his arm. Reporters called out questions about contrition. He murmured that he had trusted the wrong people. Employees filed out carrying boxes, some crying, some angry, most numb. Decades of pension savings evaporated. Merchants scrambled to reroute payment gateways. Trust, that gossamer asset, shredded in real time. Helena walked past the empty reception desk, feeling neither triumph nor defeat, only the hollow fatigue that follows the discovery of an unwelcome truth. Outside, summer rain began to fall, streaking the WirePay logo with rivulets that looked almost like tears. Benedict met her under the awning, notebook in hand. "You did it?" he said softly. Helena shook her head. "No," she replied, gazing at the darkened windows above. "The numbers did it. We just finally believed them." They stood there together, listening to the rain and to the distant wail of sirens converging on the headquarters that had once promised to transform the future, but succeeded only in erasing the present. A gray October drizzle painted streaks down the windows of 590 Madison Avenue when Rajaratnam arrived for the pre-market call. The founder of the Galleon Group moved with quiet heft, black overcoat, soft leather briefcase, no entourage. At 7:45 a.m. he settled into a trading pod ringed by Bloomberg terminals and greeted half a dozen portfolio managers with a curt nod. Inside Galleon's bullpen, murmurs eclipsed the tickers. Motorola guidance? Intel's inventory? Questions dangled like vines in a jungle thick with rumor. Rajaratnam's voice, low and unhurried, began reading from his notebook, each item introduced with the same modest preface. One of my guys heard. Within minutes, by orders rippled across tech names still cloaked in pre-earnings silence. Rajaratnam had built Galleon on 3 convictions. Information is the only raw material that depreciates by the second. Loyalty can be rented with 7-figure bonuses, and friendship, once monetized, becomes a pipeline. He cultivated consultants inside Silicon Valley fabs, Bangalore call centers, and New Jersey accounting suites, paying retainers disguised as research contracts. Their brief was simple: talk early, talk often, talk in code when necessary. Galleon, managing $7 billion, turned those crumbs of future knowledge into bread loaves of alpha that eclipsed competitors by whole percentage points. Across Midtown, on the 23rd floor of Morgan Stanley's headquarters, Anil Kumar refreshed his email, half distracted by the glow of a clandestine BlackBerry pinned beneath his desk. Kumar, a revered McKinsey partner, had once tutored Rajaratnam at Wharton and still addressed him, half-jokingly, as senior class monitor. Every few weeks Kumar forwarded a draft slide deck, pending acquisition synergies, unannounced cost cuts, then erased the sent file and closed his office door. The payments drifted back through a Singapore shell, disguised as business development consulting. Yet the edges of the network frayed where vanity rubbed against protocol. Danielle Cheesy, a brash blonde analyst at Newcastle Funds, boasted after hours that she could read CEOs like open books. She coaxed AMD executives over late-night mojitos, mined them for wafer yields, then passed the figures to Rajaratnam in cryptic midnight voicemails. Her bravado caught the ear of an SEC investigator reviewing suspicious trades around an earnings leak. A parallel FBI team, still smarting from the bare-knuckle lessons of the subprime meltdown, requested a wiretap warrant, rare territory for white-collar cases. Judge Richard Howell signed the order, and on a damp March morning agents clipped listening devices under Cheesy's office desk and inside Rajaratnam's personal line. The recordings began as a faint chorus, rustling papers, keyboard clacks, then sharpened into dialogues of startling candor. "You're good for 1,000,000 shares by close?" Rajaratnam asked one voice. "We'll crush the street," the voice replied. Dates, ticker symbols, even expected cents per share danced across the static. Each word carried the dry crackle of inevitability. Analysts at the Bureau's wire room, more accustomed to mafia slang, listened in baffled silence as billions floated across conversations polite enough for a country club veranda. While tapes stacked up, Galleon's numbers sparkled. The flagship tech fund posted 11% in a quarter where the Nasdaq lay flat. Investors, from Scandinavian pensions to Dallas endowments, applauded Rajaratnam's deep-dive research. He attended benefit galas wearing simple neckties, declining press interviews, cultivating the mystique of a man too focused to boast. Yet inside the firm, a junior trader named Adam Smith, no relation to The Economist, wondered aloud how their entry prices so often coincided with post-closing press releases. His mentor patted his shoulder. "Some people chase news, Adam, we just anticipated." Late summer 2009, the Bureau decided the harvest was ripe. Before dawn on October 16, 20 agents fanned out across Manhattan and the Jersey suburbs, radios hissing under the metallic scent of rain. At Rajaratnam's apartment on Sutton Place, the knock came loud enough to wake the East River gulls. He answered in a t-shirt emblazoned with a Sri Lankan cricket logo, eyes clear, as though he had expected punctual visitors. Handcuffs clicked. The hallway flashed with camera bulbs. A neighbor's Yorkshire Terrier barked useless protests. The arrest sent tremors through Wall Street's canyons. CNBC anchors stuttered over the phrase hedge fund wiretap, a concept nearly oxymoronic to viewers who believed insider trading was an art too subtle for microphones. Galleon investors scrambled to redeem. Prime brokers tightened credit. By week's end, the once sovereign fund froze positions and posted a farewell notice on its website. We have determined it is in the best interests of our investors to wind down. In the federal courthouse on Pearl Street, prosecutors played snippets of taped calls. The jurors leaned forward as Rajaratnam asked Cheesy to confirm exact cents in IBM's forthcoming quarter. "I need the whisper number, not the consensus." Defense counsel argued the language was industry banter, but each successive clip eroded plausibility. Anil Kumar took the stand wearing a charcoal suit 3 sizes too large, weight shed by remorse. His voice quavered as he recounted stuffing cash into Delhi hotel safes before boarding flights back to New York. Rajaratnam's conviction arrived on May 11, 2011, 14 counts, including conspiracy and securities fraud. The judge, describing a brazen, pervasive pattern of corruption, imposed an 11-year sentence, then the harshest ever for insider trading. Outside, a drizzle similar to the one that shadowed his arrest dampened microphones as journalists searched for metaphors. Some spoke of Icarus, others cited the fall of an information king. Galleon's trading floor now hosts a logistics startup. The pods remain, but the screens display shipping manifests instead of option chains. Sometimes the new tenants joke about phantom whispers lingering in the wiring, echoes of a time when milliseconds held fortunes. The case redrew the playbook for market surveillance. Hedge fund managers began attending compliance seminars, ears pricked like students after a fire drill. Research dinners once punctuated by knowing winks now ended with explicit reminders, "Public domain only, please." The Bureau, emboldened, expanded wiretaps across other funds, treating mispriced knowledge as contraband rather than coincidence. Yet the human architecture of temptation endures. Information still flits along conference call margins, across golf greens, through encrypted chats. Ambition still asks whether a single sentence heard 3 hours early is really a crime or merely a head start. Rajaratnam's story lingers as a cautionary echo, proof that in the densest thickets of capital, whispers can amplify into roars loud enough for even the most jaded investigator to hear, if only someone thinks to listen. The autumn mist over Wolfsburg tasted faintly of diesel on the morning Martin Kruger received his promotion. From a modest cubicle engineer, he was now head of compliance testing at Volkskraft's powertrain division, an unglamorous title that carried surprising sway. He accepted the new badge with a hesitant smile, wondering why an awkward software specialist deserved such rapid ascent. The answer arrived later that day, in a windowless conference room that smelled of coffee and nervous ambition. 3 men were waiting: Dr. Ulrich Behrens from Engine Development, Tobias Lorenz from Regulatory Affairs, and seated at the far end, the ever-composed board member, Frau Ingrid Vogel. An open laptop projected a single slide: U.S. emission targets, Phase 3. Below the title glowed numbers that seemed almost fanciful. Martin knew the science. A diesel, even with cutting-edge aftertreatment, could not hit those limits without choking its own heart. Frau Vogel's voice was calm, almost maternal. "Our new American model launches next spring," she said. "Marketing has promised a clean diesel miracle. We cannot fail." Tobias slid a slim folder toward Martin. Inside lay code snippets, annotations in shorthand, and one directive underlined in red: Sonderfunction. Special function. Martin realized he was staring at instructions for a defeat device. Software that would detect laboratory testing cycles and briefly scrub the exhaust, then revert to high-performance, high-pollution mode on the open road. The room fell silent, as if each attendee were listening to the faint hiss of ethical pressure escaping through a vent. Finally Dr. Behrens spoke. "We don't have another option. Hardware fixes would cost €1 billion in 2 years. Martin felt his chest tighten, but he heard himself murmur, "I'll look into it." The meeting adjourned. A promotion he understood could be a velvet shackle. Weeks slid by in a haze of code reviews and clandestine evenings. Martin recruited 2 young programmers, Stefan and Layla, telling them only that the project was confidential efficiency optimization. They worked in an isolated lab nicknamed the Aquarium because its glass walls allowed supervisors to peer inside without hearing a word. Martin installed sound masking speakers that played soft rainfall, a lullaby against stray questions. The algorithm was elegant. Monitor steering wheel angle, barometric pressure, vehicle speed, and test cell temperature. If all matched the predictable pattern of an official emissions cycle, the engine eased back, injecting extra urea, lowering combustion, purring like a saint. On real roads, where drivers turned, braked, climbed hills, the software relaxed, restoring torque and sacrificing cleanliness. The programmers were proud of the precision. Martin felt none of their pride, only a dull throb behind his eyes. Launch day arrived in San Francisco beneath a cloudless sky. Television reporters admired the European sedans parked along the Embarcadero. Green performance, one anchor gushed. Test drives impressed journalists. Torque came smooth as silk, and the tailpipes glowed with metaphorical halos. Sales climbed. Billboard slogans declared, "Pure power, pure air." Yet across the bay, at the small, grant-funded International Council for Clean Transportation, analyst Emma Wade studied discrepancies. Roadside pollution sensors registered spikes whenever fleets of the new Volkskrafts roamed nearby. In the lab, the same engines passed with honors. Emma, patient as migrating fog, collected data for months, then partnered with West Virginia University's portable testing team. They strapped emissions equipment onto 3 Volkskraft cars and drove from Los Angeles to Seattle, filling logbooks with concentrations so high they sometimes tripped alarms. Volkskraft remained serene, sponsoring jazz festivals and releasing ads of children drawing pictures on unsoiled sidewalks. Inside headquarters, Frau Vogel accepted awards for sustainability, her speeches rich with words like integrity and heritage. Martin watched these broadcasts alone in his apartment, volume muted, feeling as though his own lungs were the filters clogging with soot. In early September, Emma's group sent a courteous, technically dense letter to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA forwarded it to Volkskraft, requesting clarification. The memo landed on Tobias's desk. He called an emergency meeting. Martin, Dr. Behrens, and corporate attorneys filled the same windowless room as before. This time, nobody served coffee. The lawyers suggested a quiet software recall, phrased as an enhancement. Tobias argued for delay, perhaps blaming rogue suppliers. Martin listened, palms sweating. He finally spoke. "They have on-road data. It's irrefutable." Dr. Behrens glared as if betrayal had seated itself at the table. Frau Vogel arrived late, reviewed the slides, and closed her eyes a moment, as if mourning a lost friend. Then she ordered full cooperation, but only once every strategic option had been assessed. Cooperation proved futile. In a fluorescent EPA office outside Washington, investigators unpacked millions of lines of code, their analysis converging on Sonder function. Public notice followed. News tickers around the world flashed, "Diesel deception." Markets panicked. Volkskraft shares fell like loosened bolts. Customers felt duped, regulators furious, rival automakers quietly delighted. When German prosecutors opened a criminal probe, Martin was summoned for questioning. He confessed in measured sentences, careful to shield Stefan and Layla, who were still unaware of the device's true purpose. As he exited the gray stone courthouse, reporters crowded him. Camera shutters fluttered. One journalist asked, "Did you think you'd get away with it?" Martin, exhausted, answered with the truth he had avoided, "We wanted success more than we wanted to be right." Frau Vogel resigned, citing health reasons. Dr. Behrens retired to pursue personal projects. Tobias faced indictments for fraud. Volkskraft earmarked $25 billion for recalls and fines, a sum larger than the GDP of some nations. In dealerships, technicians flashed engine computers with new software that dulled performance and heightened fuel use. Customers grumbled. Lawsuits multiplied like sparks in dry grass. Months later, on a chilly evening, Martin stood on a pedestrian bridge over the Middle-End Canal. Cargo barges glided below, engines throbbing, their diesel fumes curling into the night. He imagined molecules of nitrogen oxide rising unseen, carrying a whisper of his guilt into the dark. When friends asked what lesson he had learned, he struggled for words. Ambition, he thought, is not evil, it is simply fire. But in sealed rooms with walls built of targets and promises, even a small flame can suffocate the air. He watched his breath mingle with the autumn haze, then turned toward the city's distant lights, aware that trust, once burned, leaves a scent that lingers longer than smoke, clinging to clothes, to memory, and most of all to silence. Elliot Grant arrived at Larchmont Securities 2 minutes before dawn, as the Thames still reflected the city's sodium glow. Newly hired as a junior analyst, he felt equal parts awe and dread while ascending the empty escalators of Canary Wharf. Larchmont's trading floor, 3 stories of glass, screens, and murmured forecasts, was whispered about in business schools as the place where fortunes appeared out of thin air. What no brochure mentioned was that the firm's real engine worked after sunset, in hushed phone calls and coded texts that never grazed a Bloomberg terminal. At the center of that undercurrent stood Victoria Havers, head of European mergers. She was in her mid-40s, with the posture of a dressage rider and a smile that rarely reached her eyes. Colleagues called her the Oracle, half in reverence, half in fear, because Victoria anticipated corporate takeovers with uncanny precision. When she recommended a client buy shares of a sleepy Dutch chemical maker, the company received a $6 billion acquisition offer a week later. When she hinted that a Spanish telecom giant looked overvalued, its shares plunged on rumors of accounting trouble none had yet reported. Elliot, assigned to Victoria's team, watched her work with almost childlike wonder. Late evenings he delivered printouts to her corner office, where she sat alone, humming faintly, eyes fixed on nothing visible. One night he risked a question: "How do you forecast events nobody else sees?" She lifted her gaze, amused. "There's always a whisper before the storm," she replied, "if you know which corridors carry sound." Elliot soon noticed irregularities. Victoria's instructions were oddly timed, by just before a regulatory filing, sell minutes before negative news. She used disposable prepaid phones, discarding one every fortnight. She never left a digital trail, instead giving orders aloud or on handwritten notes that she asked assistants to shred. At times she invited Elliot to local wine bars where she spoke in parables. "People think markets are math," she'd say, twirling a Merlot. "But markets are gossip that learn to count." Into this atmosphere stepped Miles Calder, a mid-level investigator from the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, grey-haired, mild-mannered, almost forgettable. He arranged a polite sit-down at Larchmont to discuss general compliance. Victoria greeted him warmly, offering espresso, answering questions with flawless poise. Miles departed with courteous handshakes, yet Elliot glimpsed the faintest flicker in Victoria's eyes as the elevator doors closed, an acknowledgement that the cat and mouse had sniffed each other. Weeks later, Larchmont's proprietary desk made a fortune shorting a French logistics firm hours before it announced lost government contracts. The FCA opened a formal inquiry. Victoria assured her staff it was routine. Elliot wanted to believe her. Debt from student loans pressed him like a hand on his back. Still, he began saving exported chat logs and order confirmations to a personal folder, labeling it innocuously as lunch spots. One December afternoon, a courier delivered a small parcel to Victoria. Inside lay a silver USB stick and a note: "Tomorrow 9:17 board decision." Victoria studied the message, then summoned Elliot. "I want a sensitivity model on Bjorn Pharma," she said, tone light. "Use aggressive revenue growth." Elliot knew Bjorn was rumored to be an acquisition target. He felt a pulse in his ears. That night he could not sleep. Canary Wharf's towers blinked red against low clouds, matching the crimson digits of his bedside clock. At 2 a.m. he rose, opened his laptop, and reviewed insider trading statutes. The language was precise, unemotional. His heartbeat was not. He remembered his father installing windows on construction sites in the Midlands, coming home exhausted yet honest. Elliot closed the laptop and stared into darkness until dawn. The trading floor buzzed at 9 o'clock. Victoria stood behind Elliot's chair, voice gentle. Place the order at 9:15 sharp. He entered the ticker, hovering over the keyboard. 9:14, 9:15, 9:16. His finger trembled. At 9:17 the share price leapt. Someone else had pulled the trigger. Victoria's calm expression flickered just once before she walked away without comment. That evening, Miles Calder reappeared, unannounced, flanked by two colleagues. Compliance officers escorted them to an interview room. Whispers rippled across desks. Victoria was led in first. Elliot waited on a bench, palms sweating. Through frosted glass he saw silhouettes. Miles leaning forward, Victoria's poised shoulders. An hour passed. When she emerged, her jacket was immaculate, but her eyes looked hollow, like rooms after furniture is removed. She nodded at Elliot almost kindly, then left with the investigators. The firm suspended trading in Bjorn Pharma positions. The FCA froze related accounts. Rumors spread that Victoria's source was an IT contractor at a London law firm, smuggling merger documents for cash and a promise of escape from debt. The silver USB was his dead-drop signature. Under questioning, Victoria allegedly claimed she'd acted out of professional imperative, the need to deliver results in a culture that worshipped prescience. Days later, Elliot found an envelope on his keyboard. Inside, a handwritten note for the corridors and a modest pair of noise-canceling earbuds. No signature, but the handwriting was Victoria's. He realized it was half a joke, half a benediction. Shield your ears from whispers or be claimed by them. Victoria pleaded guilty to a single count of insider trading. She received a 4-year sentence, light by headline standards but heavy for a woman who once dictated markets with a phone call. The IT contractor received 18 months and deportation. Larchmont paid £140 million in fines and settled a civil suit with aggrieved shareholders. Analysts on television shook their heads, feigning surprise, while secretly recalculating models to account for the cost of integrity. On a chilly March morning, Elliot walked along the riverbank, Canary Wharf's towers mirrored in still water. He no longer worked at Larchmont. He had taken a compliance role at a pension fund, far from the hum of trading floors. Occasionally, he reached into his coat pocket and touched the earbuds. He had never used them. Instead, he kept them as a talisman, a reminder that silence is not absence. It is the space where choices echo longest. He paused beside the water, listening. The city hummed. Buses, footsteps, distant sirens. Somewhere, corridors still carried whispers. Elliot exhaled, turned away from the glass skyline, and followed a quieter path toward the morning light, where rumors held less power and numbers, perhaps, could breathe the rare air of truth. London's glass canyons gleamed silver in the fragile dawn when Colin Mercer tapped his badge against the lobby reader of Iberian Continental Bank's trading tower. At 32, he ran the short-term interest rate desk, a vantage point from which he could watch money in its purest, vaporous form. Numbers sliding across screens, shaping futures no factory could match. Colleagues nicknamed him Clockwork, because his trades landed with metronomic profit, week after week, regardless of storms in the wider market. They assumed genius. Colin preferred they never asked what wound the gears. The heartbeat of his strategy was Libor, the benchmark that told the planet how much a dollar or euro should cost by breakfast tomorrow. Each morning at 11 o'clock, 20-odd banks whispered their borrowing estimates to a small bureau. The bureau lopped off the highs and lows, averaged the rest, and published a single sacred rate. Billions in derivatives pivoted on that tiny figure, derivatives Colin controlled. His method wasn't complicated. Persuade enough submitters to nudge their numbers by a hair, pocket the drift. A fraction of a basis point could fatten his book by £300,000. He did not bribe or threaten. He relied on camaraderie, that old city code of favors returned over pints in Leadenhall pubs. A message might read, "Little high on 3-month today, mate. Fancy a shave?" The contact would reply with a winking emoji, and the deed was done. To Colin it felt victimless, almost playful, like tilting a pinball machine. Across the river, in a rented Southwark flat, Risk analyst Priya Deshmukh sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop balanced on a stack of economics journals. She had been hired by the Financial Conduct Authority to comb historical LIBOR data for patterns that plain sight missed. What she found troubled her. On days Iberian Continental reported an outlier submission, corresponding futures volumes at the exchange spiked in the bank's favor. The correlation was modest but persistent, a tap dripping in the night. Priya asked her supervisor whether traders could influence submissions. He shrugged. They're firewalled from the treasury desks. She knew walls built of policy often crumbled against whispers built of ambition. She kept digging, scripting queries that painted time-lapse heat maps of rate movements. A single ID tag appeared frequently in chat logs the FCA had subpoenaed from other banks. See Mercer. Meanwhile, Colin's appetite grew. He began orchestrating multi-day maneuvers, easing the Monday rate, tightening Wednesday, capturing the whiplash. His chats turned bolder, sprinkled with jokes about rigging Big Ben and printing T-money. One afternoon he suggested, half serious, that submitters synchronize adjustments to spell his initials in the decimal places. They laughed. No one threatened to report. The fraternity of markets prized winners and forgave swagger. Summer 2011 arrived with rare heat, and rumors of reform floated like warm air through Canary Wharf. Newspapers speculated the benchmark might be overhauled. Politicians muttered about opacity. Colin watched the headlines with detached amusement. Reform, he believed, moved slower than profit. Then, on an otherwise forgettable Tuesday, compliance officers swept the trading floor, collecting phones and escorting several staff into side rooms. A Reuters article had broken. Regulators probe rate rigging at major banks. Colin's pulse quickened but steadied again when no one called his name. By evening he felt almost giddy, certain the net was too large to notice one fish. Priya, meanwhile, delivered her findings to senior FCA lawyers. Her presentation was quiet, the room dimmed for slides. Scatter plots blooming red where Iberian Continental's trades aligned with skewed submissions. Afterward a veteran attorney rubbed his chin. "How certain are you?" She met his eyes. "Certain enough to knock on a door tomorrow." That door belonged to Colin. Dawn cast long stripes across his minimal West End apartment when the buzz of the intercom shattered his dreams. Two officers from the Serious Fraud Office presented a warrant. Colin's smile, usually quick, faltered as they sifted through drawers, seizing USB sticks and a leather notebook filled with hand-drawn payoff diagrams. One agent read aloud a chat. "Need 3M lib low 2 ticks please. Promise champagne." The words, once harmless banter, now sounded like nails against glass. At headquarters, interviews unfolded in soft tones that belied their gravity. Colin admitted suggesting rates but denied coercion. "Everyone did it," he insisted, a phrase that tasted flimsier each time it left his mouth. Prosecutors, armed with Priya's correlation matrices, pressed harder. They displayed emails from smaller banks thanking him for profitable tips, evidence of quid pro quo that shaded friendly nudges into conspiracy. News desks lit up with the phrase LIBOR scandal, and the public learned with indignation how their mortgages and student loans linked to a rate steered by private banter. Iberian Continental suspended Colin, then dismissed him when documents showed his desk earned £44 million in 2 years. Money now labeled tainted. Shareholders filed suits. Lawmakers convened hearings. Trust, that invisible lubricant, leaked into headlines. Colin pled guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, trading liberty for candor. In court he looked smaller than the tailored suits he once favored, shoulders rounded, gaze fixed on the polished wood of the dock. The judge called the crime a subtle corrosion of faith in the financial system, sentencing him to 11 years. Gasps swept the gallery. Some bankers blanched, imagining themselves in his chair. Priya watched coverage on her flat's flickering television. She felt no triumph, only the hush that follows a storm, the uneasy knowledge that a benchmark rebuilt today could be bent again tomorrow by hands not yet scrutinized. She turned off the set and opened a window. Evening air drifted in, carrying the faint clang of St. Paul's bells. Time, she thought, keeps perfect rhythm even when markets do not. Months later, LIBOR's governance was overhauled. submissions anchored to real transactions, audits tightened, transparency pledged. Yet in conference bars, traders still joked about the old days, when rates moved like marionettes. Collins' name surfaced less often, already half mythical, a cautionary tale told with a shrug. Each weekday at 11 o'clock, a new benchmark now flashes across terminals. Priya, promoted to lead analyst, glances at the figure, then at a line of code she wrote to flag anomalies. Somewhere, gears still turn, but the room is quieter, the tick of the clock more honest, for now. Dawn slipped across Paris in pale ribbons of light, catching the mirrored skin of Société Générale's towers in La Défense. Inside the bank's sprawling trading floor, monitors glowed like a constellation, each flicker translating into millions of euros. Among the rows of blue-jacketed dealers sat Jérôme Kerviel, a quiet Breton with cropped hair, steady eyes, and a reputation for dogged precision. Colleagues called him the back-office kid who cracked the front, a nod to his unlikely ascent from paperwork clerk to equities trader. He seemed grateful, never boastful, exactly the sort of man risk managers trusted to follow rules. Trust, of course, can be a hall of mirrors. Kerviel understood the plumbing of the bank systems better than most. After all, he had once reconciled trades rather than placed them. He knew where automated checks left tiny seams, the places auditors glanced but rarely probed. By late 2006 he began slipping through those seams, booking small, unauthorized bets on European stock index futures. When they won, he canceled the fictitious hedge he had filed as camouflage and pocketed the profit for the bank. When they lost, he rolled them forward, layering fresh fabric over the stain. Senior managers noticed only the upside. His desk consistently posted outsized gains during a year when competitors sagged. Every evening, cleaning staff watched him linger long after others logged off. He wasn't merely committed, he was possessed. He built false offsetting trades using counterparties that existed only inside his keyboard, then fed forged confirmations into the settlement system. Because the phony hedges mirrored his real positions in size and tenor, automated reports showed a net exposure near zero. To compliance, Kerviel looked like the paragon of prudence. The profits snowballed, and each success coaxed him to double down. By summer 2007, his true exposure hovered near 30 billion euros, roughly the GDP of a small nation, yet the official books still read flat. Only a handful of close friends sensed anything unusual. His sudden taste for expensive Bordeaux, the way he joked about dancing with the tornado. Still, his apartment remained modest, his manner shy. He told himself he wasn't stealing. He was outsmarting a bloated system and earning the firm a fortune. Ambition blurred neatly into rationalization. In August, storm clouds gathered over Wall Street as subprime tremors rattled global markets. Volatility spiked, but Kerviel held his course, convinced he could surf the chaos. His unseen portfolio now edged past 40 billion euros, 4 times the bank's authorized risk limit for the entire equities division. Each morning he forged new counter-trades to keep the illusion alive. Computer alarms rang in back-office cubicles, only to be silenced by his carefully edited explanations. A miskeyed trade, a test entry, a deal awaiting confirmation. The clerks, swamped and under pressure, shrugged and moved on. Then came January 18, 2008. A mid-level risk controller named Marianne Chenier noticed a glaring oddity. Kerviel had booked a massive hedge with Deutsche Bank over a holiday weekend when German markets were closed. She picked up the phone. Deutsche Bank's middle office had no record of such a trade. Chenier escalated the finding. Emails flew up the chain. By that evening, compliance officers encircled Kerviel's desk like surgeons around a patient whose pulse had flatlined. He didn't flee. Instead, he answered calmly, offering thick binders of printed confirmations. A closer look showed doctored logos, mismatched fonts, dates that bent the calendar. One manager whispered an expletive. Another stared at the ceiling as if searching for a trapdoor. Within hours, executives realized the bank sat on secret positions totaling 50 billion euros, more than its entire market capitalization. Unwinding them would batter already fragile markets. Hesitation, however, meant annihilation. The following Monday, while most of France savored morning espresso, Société Générale began dumping futures into a falling market, desperate to flatten exposure before word leaked. Screens bled red. Global indices fell so sharply that pundits initially blamed a phantom U.S. recession rumor. By Wednesday, the bank had crystallized a €4.9 billion loss, the largest rogue trading hit in history. Only then did management go public, framing Kerviel as a lone wolf who used cunning and deceit to elude all controls. Analysts gasped, shareholders raged, politicians convened emergency hearings. Kerviel retreated to his mother's house in Pont-l'Abbé, where reporters camped on the damp roadside. He paced the living room parquet, phone buzzing with calls from lawyers offering salvation. Friends urged him to vanish across a border, but he felt oddly relieved, as if an iron mask had slipped away. 3 days later he took a train to Paris and surrendered, walking past camera flashes with the weary posture of someone returning borrowed time. Interrogations stretched deep into the night. Investigators asked why he hadn't enriched himself. Apart from a few lavish dinners and a second-hand Audi, his bank account was ordinary. Kerviel spoke of playing the game, of proving that control frameworks were paper shields. Some heard contrition, others heard arrogance. Either way, the fallout spread. Bonuses were clawed back, regulators rewrote rulebooks, and the bank sold prized assets to plug the crater in its balance sheet. In court, prosecutors painted him as a sorcerer of spreadsheets, reckless and narcissistic. Defense attorneys depicted a culture intoxicated by profit, happy to applaud miracles until the curtain snagged. The tribunal finally handed down a 5-year sentence, with 3 years firm, plus an order to repay the full €4.9 billion, an impossible sum that hung over him like cosmic satire. He served 18 months, emerging to ankle bracelets, job training workshops, and the uneasy status of folk anti-hero. Years later, on quiet evenings, Kerviel sometimes walks along the Seine, watching commuter lights skim the water. The towers of La Défense still glimmer in the distance, their glass faces opaque, withholding. He thinks of the moment a cursor blinked on his screen, inviting one more fabricated hedge, one more step across the line where audacity hardens into fraud. In that blink lived destiny, for himself, for the bank, for every risk officer now double-checking a trade that looks too perfect. The lesson remains suspended in the Parisian dusk. Controls are only as strong as the hunger they must restrain, and a single determined mind, fluent in the machinery of trust, can tilt the financial world until even skyscrapers seem to wobble. Adrian Lowe spent his nights in the silent glare of a Mountain View clean room, coaxing photons through silicon. At 36 he led the LiDAR program at Waypath, the autonomous vehicle unit of an alphabet-sized conglomerate. The team called him the cartographer. His algorithms painted invisible cities of light around every prototype car. Investors valued those spinning sensors at billions, and Adrian, though awkward in conversation, felt the heady thrum of destiny each time the lasers chimed alive. Yet destiny turned fickle in February 2016. A reorganization diminished Adrian's domain. Half his headcount was reassigned to safety redundancy. He watched junior MBAs redraw roadmaps he had etched in code, and something inside him cooled from fire to ice. One drizzly evening he connected a terabyte drive to the secure server, bypassed a flag with a line of command line Latin, and copied 14,000 files. Schematics, board layouts, manufacturing tolerances, enough he believed to rebuild the crown jewel elsewhere. The transfer bar filled in silence, green pixels reflecting in his rimless glasses. When it finished, he wiped the audit logs and drove home along US 101, the rain stitching faint Morse against the windshield. Weeks later Adrian resigned, to pursue new challenges. Silicon Valley gossip blinked like fairy lights. He had funding from Sequoia and Kleiner, he was building stealth rockets, he was retiring to Mendocino to farm truffles. The truth materialized 3 months later when he unveiled Helios Robotics, promising level 5 autonomy within a year, a timeline that made engineers laugh and venture capitalists salivate. Helios's website showcased a cylindrical LiDAR unit strikingly similar to Waypath's latest prototype, minus the corporate pastel. Across the Bay, Ride Nation, the ride-sharing colossus famous for surge pricing and steel-nerved aggression, felt its self-driving program lagging. Its CEO, Dana Pike, wanted victory, not parity. She met Adrian in a decommissioned airport hangar converted into a private test track. He demoed a Helios vehicle weaving between cardboard pedestrians with balletic grace. Dana's eyes narrowed. She offered $680 million in stock and cash on the spot. Adrian paused only long enough to check the vesting schedule. Ride Nation's engineers welcomed Helios with cautious applause that hid unease. Among them was Jessica Marlowe, a tall, soft-spoken systems integrity lead who believed software was a covenant, not a commodity. She reviewed Helios design packages and noticed folder structures identical to Waypath's internal taxonomy, obscure naming conventions like Plover_thermal_V7. One schematic still bore a faint footer, property of Waypath Confidential. Jessica reported the anomaly. Upper management thanked her and told her to focus forward. Tech, they said, evolved through rapid iteration, not litigation. But the footprint was too perfect, like a snow angel left by someone who never returned. Jessica dug quietly. In log archives she found a directory labeled Churchill, Waypath's code name for a novel 4-channel photodiode array announced only after Helios's founding. The dates didn't add up. She saved screenshots to an encrypted thumb drive, unsure whether she was safeguarding the company or its future prosecutor. Ride Nation's first integrated Helios test rolled onto San Jose streets that autumn. Tech bloggers crowded sidewalks, live streams ticking upward. The SUV shimmered with promise until, at a left turn, it drifted across the center line, forcing a cyclist to swerve. The vehicle righted itself, but the incident clip revealed a sensor dropout traced to firmware Adrian had altered that morning. Dana Pike summoned him. He blamed legacy interference and requested deeper access to Ride Nation's servers. The CEO granted it, desperate for headlines of success. Meanwhile, Waypath filed a civil action in federal court. Trade secret misappropriation, patent infringement, unjust enrichment. Their lawyers attached forensic evidence. Download timestamps matching Adrian's last week, security badge swipes synced to anomalous data transfers. The suit sought billions and an injunction. Tech reporters, smelling a courtroom epic, refreshed Pacer as though it dispensed oxygen. Ride Nation's legal chief convened an urgent review. Jessica, summoned as a fact witness, presented her thumb drive. Silence thickened. One attorney whispered, "This is radioactive." Dana Pike, jaw tight, asked Adrian directly, "Did you take their files?" Adrian met her gaze, a pale flicker behind pupils gone stormy, and said, "I built those files." The room registered the semantic dodge. The law, however, rarely honors philosophy over packet headers. Negotiations with Waypath collapsed when an internal memo leaked describing Ride Nation's strategy as sidestep then steamroll. The judge fast-tracked discovery. Federal marshals appeared at Adrian's Palo Alto townhouse at dawn, seizing laptops, external drives, even an antique slide rule on his bookshelf. Reporters captured him in athletic shorts, expression fixed between anger and incredulity, as though physics had betrayed him. Dana issued placid press releases about re-evaluation, but board members murmured about fiduciary breach. Investors shaved billions off the valuation, and Dana's once meteoric career entered a holding pattern above corporate purgatory. Adrian faced criminal charges for theft of trade secrets. At arraignment he stood rigid, hands clasped, while the prosecutor described a premeditated looting of intellectual property. Jessica, watching from the gallery, felt a hollow relief tempered by dread. Ecosystems change when giants stumble. Outside, protesters chanted about worker rights, while venture capital tweets lamented innovation chilling. The trial never reached verdict. In a late-night deal, Adrian pled guilty to one count, avoiding a lengthy sentence in exchange for $95 million restitution and a 28-month term at a low-security facility in Lompoc. Waypath secured a perpetual license to any Helios patents. Ride Nation paid $245 million and issued a public apology couched in conditional verbs. On Adrian's first day in prison, the warden escorted him past a chain-link fence buzzing with desert wind. He blinked at the unfiltered blue sky, No LiDAR map overlaying the horizon, only bare existence. A reporter later asked what he regretted most. Through plexiglass, Adrian answered softly, "I thought code was neutral. Turns out ghosts live inside." The quote headlined tech blogs for a day, then slid beneath new controversies. Some evenings she drives the Bayshore Freeway and imagines invisible beams tracing the contours of traffic, each pulse a reminder that every line of code carries fingerprints, and every shortcut casts a shadow. In Mountain View, the original waypath sensor still spins atop updated cars, its hum modest but persistent, like a truth refused erasure. Passers-by rarely look up, yet light sweeps them anyway, recording position, velocity, intent. Ghost code, if it lingers, does so in silence, waiting for anyone to notice the faint imprint it leaves on the roads we trust. Bernard Madoff's office at 885 3rd Avenue felt less like Wall Street and more like a private club hidden high above it. Persian rugs muted every footstep, cream-colored couches swallowed visitors in discreet comfort, and a single abstract painting, crimson triangles rising toward a vanishing point, hung behind the reception desk. Clients called it the pyramid, though no one pondered the symbolism for long. They were there to see Bernie, the kindly elder statesman who spoke in a grandfather's hush and delivered returns as steady as the Hudson's tide. For decades the pattern never broke. 10, 11, sometimes 12%, good years and bad, recessions and booms, the line on quarterly statements climbed at an unwavering angle. Teachers' pension trustees in Ohio, a Paris private banking family, a Hollywood director. All received identical reassurance. "Nothing fancy," Bernie would say, patting a shoulder, "just disciplined hedging." He dismissed questions with a genial wave, "Why complicate a gift horse?" and invited them to view the Velvet Room, the gilt elevator ride downstairs where computers supposedly ran a secret algorithm. Few accepted. Fewer still noticed that the trading floor was silent, screens resting on blank blue desktops like sleeping eyes. Up on the 19th floor, Frank DiPascali managed the books, a Queen's accent softening into deference whenever Bernie entered. Frank's spreadsheets reported trades in big-cap American stocks placed at impossible prices, always a hair above the market's daily low or below its high. A junior accountant once joked they should buy lottery tickets with odds like that. Frank smiled, then deleted the column and reminded her Bernie's strategy involved split-strike conversions, too technical to dissect. The accountant told herself genius often hides behind jargon, and returned to reconciling deposits that arrived in cheerful torrents. One person, however, found the cheer too uniform. Dina Gold, a financial analyst at a Boston fund of funds, read Madoff's statements with a mathematician's skepticism. She plotted Bernie's monthly returns against the S&P 500 and saw a near-perfect horizontal bar. No volatility, no drawdowns, just smooth ascent. "Markets aren't rivers," she told her supervisor. "They're oceans, waves, storms." Her concerns were logged, then buried beneath the weight of boardroom gratitude. Every institution wants a linchpin that never slips. Winter 2008 brought crisp air and unrelenting headlines. Housing defaults, credit default swaps, names like Lehman and Bear tumbling from pedestals. Through the chaos, Bernie sent his usual letters, reassuring paragraphs, gentle fonts. Clients felt lucky. They told friends who in turn wired fresh millions. Money had become frightened, and frightened money seeks certainty. One Friday in early December, Bernie's sons, Mark and Andrew, climbed the mahogany stairs to their father's penthouse apartment on East 64th Street. They'd heard rumors, counterparties refusing trades, clearing firms demanding collateral. In the living room, Ruth Madoff poured tea while holiday lights blinked along Fifth Avenue. Bernie, wearing gray cashmere, asked the sons to sit. His voice cracked as he began, "It's all one big lie." They stared, uncomprehending. Bernie explained that no trades had been executed for years. Deposits from new investors paid redemptions to old ones. "About 50 billion, he whispered. Silence stretched until the mantel clock chimed 6. Mark finally asked, "What's the plan?" Bernie looked up with tired eyes. "I was thinking of mailing bonuses, then turning myself in." The sons left in shock, dialed a lawyer, and were advised to report immediately. By morning the FBI rang the apartment buzzer. Agent Theodore Cassioppi found Bernie seated in a leather chair, hands folded. "Are there any innocent explanations?" the agent asked. Bernie shook his head. "No, it's just me." He rose, wrists extended for cuffs, then reconsidered and removed his wedding band, placing it on a side table as if checking valuables before surgery. Down on the sidewalk, cameras flashed. By evening, the crimson triangles of the office painting filled television screens worldwide. As subpoenas landed, the structure revealed itself. A simple ledger, assets always greater than liabilities on paper, while actual cash pooled in a Chase bank account whose balance dwindled whenever redemptions surged. There were no offshore labyrinths, no exotic options. Dina Gold watched events unfold on CNBC, feeling a twist of vindication knotted with dread. Her firm had invested $23 million. Auditors now labeled the position worthless. Across Europe, charities canceled scholarships, and an elderly couple in Avignon sold their vineyard to cover tax bills on phantom gains. Grief surfaced in unlikely forms. A Palm Beach retiree stood mute before an empty safe deposit box. In March 2009, Bernie entered the federal courtroom in Lower Manhattan wearing a bulletproof vest under his blazer, an irony that did not escape observers who trusted him to guard their futures. He pleaded guilty to 11 counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. When Judge Denny Chin asked why he surrendered, Bernie said, "I realized my arrest would inevitably happen." The word inevitably hung like mist. Minutes later, Chin imposed 150 years. Spectators exhaled in collective astonishment, not because of the length but because the system, so often lenient with boardroom crime, had finally measured punishment in centuries. Frank D. Pascali cooperated, pouring detail into hundreds of pages, backdated trades, off-the-shelf software that generated statements, a Xerox machine that hummed past midnight. He died of cancer before sentencing, his deposition sealed with a final apology to everyone who believed. Today the Crimson Triangle painting sits in an evidence warehouse in Queens, wrapped in climate-controlled plastic. Tour guides at the federal prison in Butner, North Carolina, sometimes mention a former inmate who once managed billions and now mops hallways for 14 cents an hour. Visitors peer down corridors, hoping for a glimpse, but Bernie has retreated into the privacy that eluded him in freedom. On stormy nights, Dina Gold revisits her old spreadsheets, scrolling through columns of impossible steadiness. She teaches graduate seminars now, urging students to cherish volatility, the heartbeat of truthful data, she calls it. At times she remembers Bernie's receptionist guiding her past the crimson painting, its pyramid pointing upward into nothingness, and feels a chill. Perhaps the lesson is simple. When returns look like velvet, run your fingers against the grain. Fabric that's smooth may hide threads designed to unravel all at once. A single copy of Madoff's quarterly statement lies laminated on Dina's desk, not as a trophy but as a map of temptation. In the margin she has penciled a line from Virgil: "Facilis descensus Averno, the descent to ruin is easy." She shows it to students at semester's end, then closes the folder, the whisper of its cover sounding like the soft sigh of curtains falling on an illusion finally gone dark. Morning fog still veiled the Seine when Jerome Kerviel swiped his badge through the glass turnstiles of Société Générale's steel and smoke La Défense Tower. At 30, he wore the modest suit of a provincial striver, but colleagues on the Delta One desk called him the magician. Somehow his tiny book of equity futures produced profits rivaling those of traders with 5 times his capital. Managers praised his market feel, and Jerome accepted accolades with a shy half-smile that disguised the frantic arithmetic ticking behind his eyes. The Delta One unit was built for low-risk hedging, plain vanilla index futures, arbitrage so dull it barely rustled spreadsheets. Yet dullness breeds permission. Risk controllers glanced at the desk's position reports, saw moderate numbers, and moved on to sexier threats like credit derivatives. They never noticed Jerome's private universe hidden one menu deep inside the trading system, a secret blotter labeled "Suspended, JK." In that twilight ledger, his wagers ballooned. Long 3 billion euros of Euro stocks here, short DAX there, bets balanced like spinning plates. Each evening he entered fictitious offsetting trades, contraparties invented from whole cloth, so official limits showed gentle ripples instead of tidal waves. In a nearby office, risk analyst Isabel Mellet tracked daily limits with methodical calm. She noticed Jerome's VR, a measure of potential loss, remained eerily flat even on days when volatility rattled every other desk. She emailed compliance, "JK returns deviate from peers, request deeper review." The reply arrived minutes later, acknowledged, position within thresholds. Isabel archived the thread, but the anomaly nagged her like a loose stitch in a winter coat. December 2007 brought roaring markets and roaring office parties. Jerome celebrated record gains. His manager, Jean-Luc Heilbronn, raised champagne and spoke of promotions. Jerome nodded, eyes on the floor. He alone knew the scale. Net exposure approaching 50 billion euros, more than the bank's market cap, leveraged through rolling futures that expired weekly, forcing a perpetual juggle. One slip and the masks would fall. The slip came with the new year. Global stocks trembled on subprime tremors. Futures gaps widened like cracked ice. Jerome logged in at dawn on January 18, 2008 and saw red figures bleeding across monitors. To stem losses he forged yet another counter trade, but the volume was so vast the back-office catalog balked. An automated reconciliation flagged a transaction against the ID of an obscure brokerage that had ceased to exist months earlier. The query landed on Isabel's desk. She walked the corridor to Jean-Luc's office, printout in hand. He skimmed it, brow furrowing. "Probably a booking error," he muttered, but dialed Jerome anyway. The trader arrived moments later, cheeks flushed. Jean-Luc asked about the phantom broker. Jerome's mouth opened, searching for a plausible glitch. Words failed. Silence spread, hot and brittle. Jean-Luc ordered a full position report. Jerome returned to his desk, heart hammering, and began unwinding trades at market speed, selling billions into a falling market, waves that pushed prices lower still. By Monday morning, Société Générale faced a 6.3 billion euro loss, the largest rogue trading hit in history. Crisis meetings unfurled behind closed doors. Executives debated whether to blame markets or disclose the deeper wound. When regulators arrived, Jerome sat in a windowless conference room, fingers interlaced, recounting how a desire to prove myself had morphed into clandestine bets. He spoke without anger, almost with relief, as if captivity finally slowed the spinning plates. The bank rushed a press conference. CEO Daniel Boughton, pale beneath TV lights, called it an exceptional fraud committed by a single employee. Analysts scoffed. How could one mid-level trader move markets without alarms? Shares plunged 39% in 2 days. Commentators compared the loss to a small war chest. Depositors lined up at branches in quiet panic. Trust, thinner than rice paper, tore in public view. French prosecutors charged Jerome with breach of trust, forgery, and unauthorized computer use. At trial, the defense argued the bank benefited from Jerome's gains for years and turned a blind eye to methods. Prosecutors countered that he gambled with other people's futures, forging documents 2,400 times. Jerome, slender in an ill-fitting suit, admitted forging trades but insisted his intent was never theft, only to outdo himself day after day until the numbers ruled their creator. The court sentenced him to 5 years, 2 suspended, and 4.9 billion euros in restitution, an amount no salary could touch, more symbol than sentence. Société Générale strengthened controls, installing risk dashboards that blink crimson at the faintest divergence. Yet whispers in dealing rooms persisted. Could management really not know? Regulations tightened across Europe, but the memory of invisible digits piling into catastrophe proved harder to code. Isabel returned to her routines, now armed with broader audit access, yet the victory felt hollow. She had tugged a thread and watched a tapestry collapse on pensioners, students, entire towns whose savings linked to the bank's stock. On certain mornings she paused by the Seine, mist curling like unanswered questions, and wondered whether vigilance alone could cage ambition sharpened by boredom. Jerome served his term at Fleury-Mérogis, teaching fellow inmates accounting basics. Reporters pressed him for remorse. He often replied with a half shrug, I played a game everyone around me applauded, until the dice rolled against us. After release he worked briefly as a tech consultant, then faded from headlines. The 4.9 billion euros still hangs over him, accruing symbolic interest, a reminder that some debts are calibrated not in currency but in cautionary weight. La Défense towers continue to glitter at dusk, their glass hides freshly polished compliance manuals. Yet inside, traders still chase slivers of basis points, screens still blink with futures ticks. Somewhere on a middle desk an ambitious junior studies market microstructure and feels the first spark of mastery. Outside, the Seine flows indifferent, carrying reflections of skyscrapers that promise solidity yet mirror water's own lesson. Even calm surfaces conceal currents swift enough to pull the unwatchful under. Bernard Ebers liked to greet visitors with a firm handshake and a folksy drawl that made Wall Street analysts forget they were standing in a converted tractor repair warehouse in Clinton, Mississippi. There, framed by corrugated metal and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights, he built WorldCom, a patchwork of long-distance carriers stitched together into the second-largest telecom in America. "We're just stringing wire and telling stories," he'd chuckle, as if $40 billion in annual revenue were a side hustle. Investors adored the myth of the humble titan. So did television anchors, who filmed him in cowboy boots pacing the trading floor like a country preacher among spreadsheets. On the 18th floor of headquarters, Cynthia Cooper, internal audit vice president, kept quieter company, log files, purchase orders, and the faint click of keys after midnight. Cynthia believed numbers possessed a moral gravity. If they strayed from truth, they would tug someone back toward them. Late one April evening in 2002, she compared network capacity invoices to capital expenditure lines and felt that tug. Expenses for routine line leases, a cost that should bleed through the income statement, had been rerouted to the balance sheet, where they posed as prepaid capacity. The reclassification inflated profit by nearly $1 billion, a cosmetic surgery so crude Cynthia wondered whether she had opened the wrong spreadsheet. She walked the corridor to Buford Yates, the corporate controller whose office smelled of pine-scented floor polish. Holding her printout like contraband, she asked why expenses wore costumes. Buford's warm grin flickered. "That's a one-off adjustment," he said, closing a leather binder. "We'll reverse it next quarter." Cynthia nodded, but doubt shadowed her steps back to the audit war room, a windowless nook crowned by humming servers and a poster that read "Integrity is what you do when no one is watching." Outside, the dot-com bubble had burst and telecom stocks lay in rubble. Yet WorldCom reported record earnings, a lone green sprout in scorched earth. Ebers cited synergies from recent mergers and vowed double-digit growth. On CNBC he joked that Mississippi catfish thrived in murky water, and so do we. Traders laughed, their screens flashing by in confident green. Meanwhile, employees whispered about layoffs, frozen travel budgets, and an edict to reuse paper clips. Cynthia expanded her probe, enlisting 2 auditors, Glenn Smith and Gene Morse, sworn to secrecy. Each night they combed the general ledger, tracing entries into a maze where ordinary costs, fiber repairs, switch rentals, vanished through a trapdoor labeled capital expenditures, corporate. The total misclassified amount now exceeded $3.3 billion. Cynthia's chest tightened. She remembered her mother balancing checkbooks to the penny and imagined that level of care estranged from a corporation steering retirement dreams. They scheduled a discreet meeting with David Myers, WorldCom's urbane chief accountant. Cynthia laid out her findings. Myers adjusted his glasses, whispered that CFO Scott Sullivan had ordered the entries. "It's temporary," he assured them, voice papery. "If we don't hit earnings targets, we risk a downgrade. Then everyone suffers." Cynthia thought of engineers testing fiber lines at dawn, their 401(k)s knotted to those earnings. She thanked Myers, but inside she felt the snap of an ethical tripwire. That weekend she phoned WorldCom's audit committee chair, former SEC Commissioner Max Bobbitt, reaching him at a North Carolina mountain cabin. In calm sentences she outlined billions in suspect entries and her fear of retaliation. Bobbitt, stunned, told her to keep digging, quietly, and promised board support. For the first time, Cynthia realized the tug in the numbers might unravel the company's entire quilt. In late June, Ebers resigned amid unrelated personal loan controversies, leaving Sullivan as acting navigator. Ratings agencies lurked like storm clouds. Cynthia's team met nightly, hiding spreadsheets behind innocuous file names, vacation photos, recipe book. On June 20th at 2:18 a.m., Gene hit enter on a pivot table that confirmed $3.85 billion in fraudulent capitalization. He exhaled a single word: finished. The next morning, Cynthia and Glynn rode the elevator with Sullivan himself. He chatted about weekend fishing. She nodded, pulse thrumming. Hours later she presented her final memo to the audit committee: material misstatement, immediate disclosure recommended. Within 48 hours the board confronted Sullivan. He admitted the scheme but insisted it could be corrected quietly. The directors stared, silent. By evening, Sullivan was escorted out under the flicker of exit signs. Myers followed. WorldCom announced it would restate earnings by $3.8 billion, the largest accounting fraud ever disclosed, though further review would swell the figure to $11 billion. Markets reeled. Shares plunged from $15 to 20 cents. Pension funds lost billions. 17,000 employees opened pink envelopes. At the SEC, Enforcement Chief Stephen Cutler likened the fraud to painting a flag on a hole and calling it a game. Congress summoned Cynthia, her calm testimony a lighthouse amid rhetorical storm. Asked why she persevered, she replied, "I was raised to believe the truth is our final job." Sullivan stood trial first. Prosecutors displayed emails: "We need another $500 million are shifting, cook the gap." Jurors watched him rub his temples. The verdict, 5 counts of securities fraud, carried a 25-year sentence. Ebers followed, claiming ignorance, but phone logs showed late-night calls with Sullivan preceding every quarterly close. The jury deliberated scarcely 8 hours before convicting him on 9 counts. The judge, quoting proverbs about false scales, imposed 25 years. Ebers, once hailed as Mississippi's benevolent billionaire, reported to a Louisiana prison nursing a failing heart. He died there in 2020. WorldCom emerged from Chapter 11 rebranded as MCI, later absorbed by Verizon, its logo erased but ghostly on abandoned office mugs. Cynthia Cooper was named one of Time's Persons of the Year and wrote a memoir, though she returned to quieter pursuits. Teaching ethics workshops where she passes around a WorldCom ledger page, numbers faded, truth belatedly restored. Participants run fingers over the thin paper, amazed that billions can hide in plain sight until one person, working after hours, threads a needle between courage and collapse. Some nights Cynthia walks her Jackson neighborhood under sodium streetlights, remembering fluorescent nights in the war room. She knows control systems will forever duel ambition, that another ledger in another city may already be warping. Still, she believes in gravity. Eventually, numbers fall to earth, and when they do, someone must be there, eyes open, to chart the descent and name it honestly.